Second Miss, the madam said, this manor is peaceful, perfect for convalescence. Old Nanny Zhao tossed the bundle onto the Kong, raising dust that blew into Shen Qingci's face. She did not dodge. She simply stood there looking at the room. Earthen walls, a drafty window, a broken Kong, not even a table. Exactly the same as in her past life. Even the mole on Nanny Zhao's face trembled in the same spot. Nanny, you've worked hard. Shen Qingci's voice came out hoarse. Nanny Zhao squinted at her. Knowing I worked hard is enough. The madam is kind, letting me come to look after you. From now on you must be obedient and not cause the madam any trouble. Look after her. A cold sneer twisted inside Shen Qingci. It was surveillance, a death sentence. In her past life she had believed this lie, genuinely thinking her stepmother Lady Wang was being kind by sending her to the countryside to recuperate. And the result? Rations were docked, medical care denied, and within half a year she was too ill to leave her bed. Nanny Zhao stole her last pieces of jewelry and fled. She lay alone on that Kong, burning with fever, when she heard someone outside say the Marquis mansion had forgotten her. Forgotten completely. Until her dying breath. Second Miss. Nanny Zhao urged, what are you standing there for? Put your things away. This room is filthy. I need to fetch some water. After speaking she turned and went out, the door slamming shut with a bang. Shen Qingci didn't move. She walked to the Kong and reached out to touch the bundle. Coarse cloth patched. She opened it. Inside were two half-worn summer clothes, the fabric so thin it was translucent. A set of coarse porcelain bowls and chopsticks. That was all. Not even a quilt. She closed her eyes. A buzzing filled her head. Not from anger but from the lingering shock. From opening her eyes to find she had returned to age 15, bouncing along in the Marquis-worn carriage, to now standing in this broken room, all within 2 hours. 2 hours were enough for her to die once and come back to life. Enough for her to take the hatred she felt before dying, chew it up again, swallow it, and turn it into nails embedded in her bones. Footsteps came from outside. Shen Qingci opened her eyes, her face utterly expressionless. Nanny Zhao entered carrying a broken wooden basin, water spilling across the floor. Here, wipe yourself. I'll go check the kitchen, see what's for supper. She shoved the basin onto the ground, water splashing onto Shen Qingci's shoes. Shen Qingci looked down at the wet mark on her shoe. Nanny, she called to the woman about to leave. What now? My monthly allowance, Shen Qingci said, looking straight at Nanny Zhao. Before I left the mansion the madam said it would be 2 taels a month entrusted to you to bring. Give me the first month's now, Nanny. Nanny Zhao stiffened. Her small eyes darted rapidly, the flesh on her cheeks twitching. What monthly allowance? The madam didn't say anything about that. She raised her voice. Second Miss, don't talk nonsense. The madam sent you here to recuperate. That's a great kindness, and you're thinking about money. What would people think if they heard that? Shen Qingci didn't reply. She just stared at Nanny Zhao, staring until Nanny Zhao felt a chill run down her spine. What are you staring at? Nanny Zhao's voice grew even sharper. I said there's nothing. You're just a concubine's daughter. Your food and clothing are provided by the mansion, and you still want silver. Dream on. Nanny. Shen Qingci took a step forward. Nanny Zhao instinctively stepped back, her back hitting the door panel. You. What do you want? I'm not doing anything. Shen Qingci stopped in front of her, her voice low, each word deliberate. I just want to ask you one thing, Nanny. Did the madam give you the money or not? No. Then fine. Shen Qingci nodded. I'll write a letter home tonight and ask whether the Marquis mansion has become so poor it can't even pay 2 taels, or if someone is lining their own pockets. The last 4 words came out very slowly. Nanny Zhao's face went pale. You dare threaten me? I wouldn't dare. Shen Qingci forced a faint smile. I'm just a concubine's daughter dying of illness. At least let me die knowing the truth. Don't you think so, Nanny? Dead silence filled the room. Nanny Zhao's chest heaved, her eyes fixed on Shen Qingci with disbelief. She hadn't expected this. Not at all. This second daughter, who in the mansion never even dared to speak loudly, had changed as soon as she arrived at the manor. That gaze. Cold enough to chill the soul. You. Nanny Zhao's throat went dry. Just wait. She turned, yanked the door open and rushed out. The sound of footsteps thumped away into the distance. Shen Qingci didn't follow. She walked back to the Kong and sat down. The earthen bed was ice cold, the hardness pressing into her bones. She reached into her bosom and pulled out a small cloth bundle. Opening it, inside were a few pieces of broken silver, less than 1 tael in total, and a silver hairpin plain without any pattern, the only thing her birth mother had left her. In her past life this hairpin too had been stolen by Nanny Zhao. Shen Qingci gripped the hairpin tightly in her hand. The silver wasn't enough. The 2 taels monthly allowance. Nanny Zhao had definitely pocketed it. Not just this month, she would steal it every month from now on. In her past life until Shen Qingci died of illness, Nanny Zhao had taken at least 20 taels. 20 taels. Enough for a farming family to live on for 2 years. Shen Qingci counted the silver fragments again, wrapped them up and tucked them back into her bosom. She had to find a way. With only this much silver she wouldn't survive the winter. This manor was remote. Even the nearest town was half an hour's walk away. She needed to get out to get money to first establish her footing. As she was thinking, shouts erupted outside. "Little vixen! You're rebelling against heaven!" It was Nanny Zhao, her voice shrill enough to pierce eardrums. A man's voice followed, rough and coarse, the words unclear. Shen Qingci stood up and walked to the window. The paper on the window was torn, leaving a hole. She leaned in to look. In the yard, Nanny Zhao was yanking the arm of a stocky, dark-skinned youth, spittle flying as she yelled. "Lazy and shirking. I told you to carry water. Where's the water? The jar is almost empty." The youth kept his head down, muttering, "My mother is sick. I need to go back." "Go back? You haven't finished your work." "What do you mean, go back?" Nanny Zhao raised her other hand to slap his head. Shen Qingci pushed the door open and stepped out. "Nanny!" Nanny Zhao's hand stopped in midair. She turned to glare. "What are you coming out for again?" "I heard the noise." Shen Qingci walked to the middle of the yard and glanced at the youth. He was 16 or 17, clothes patched on patches but clean. His face was dark but his eyes were bright. Right now they were red from holding back tears. "What's his name?" Shen Qingci asked. "Qingci. A farm boy." Nanny Zhao snapped. "Second miss, this is none of your business. Go back inside." Shen Qingci didn't move. She looked at Qingci. "What illness does your mother have?" Qingci was stunned. He looked up at her, stared for 2 seconds, then quickly dropped his head again. "Fever. Coughing for days." "Did you call a doctor?" "No. No money." Shen Qingci was silent for a moment. She remembered something from her past life. There seemed to have been such a person. When she was gravely ill, she heard someone crying outside saying his mother had died, and there was no money to bury her. Later she died too and never knew what became of the boy. Nanny Shen Qingci turned to Nanny Zhao. "What?" Nanny Zhao shrieked. "His work is not. I'll carry the water," Shen Qingci interrupted. "Where's the jar?" Nanny Zhao's mouth hung open, unable to speak for a long time. Qingci was stunned too, staring dumbly at Shen Qingci. "Second miss, you. You can't carry it." He stammered. "If I can't carry much, I'll carry a little," Shen Qingci said. "That's still better than delaying your mother's treatment." After she spoke, she ignored Nanny Zhao's face, which had turned the color of pig liver, and walked straight toward the water jar in the corner of the yard. By the jar leaned a carrying pole and 2 wooden buckets, the rims cracked. Shen Qingci bent down and lifted the pole. It was heavy. The rough wood chafed her hands. She didn't hesitate. She set the pole on her shoulder and bent to hook the buckets. Her movements were clumsy. One bucket wobbled and nearly hit her foot. "Second miss." Qingci rushed over and grabbed the pole. Let me carry this load first, then I'll go." He was strong, or in a few moves he had the buckets attached, lifted the pole and headed out of the yard. He walked fast, as if afraid Shen Qingci would change her mind. Nanny Zhao stood where she was, chest heaving. "Fine. Just fine." She pointed at Shen Qingci. "Second miss is truly a bodhisattva's heart. Fine. You're so capable. From now on, do all the work in this manner yourself." She threw her hands up and retreated to her own room, slamming the door so hard the house shook. Shen Qingci ignored her. She stood in the yard, looking in the direction Qingci had run. A farmer's child. Honest, simple. Perhaps useful. Just as she was thinking, a sudden ding sounded in her head. A flat, monotone voice spoke. "Detected host survival will has reached threshold. The beautiful field system is activated. Newbie gift pack being distributed." Shen Qingci froze. What was this? Gift pack contents: 1 pack of high-quality cabbage seeds, enough for 10 mu basic planting knowledge. Already instilled spiritual spring space, beginner level. Yields 1 bowl of water per day. Please confirm receipt, host. Shen Qingci stood motionless. Wind swept through the yard, stirring the dust. Dogs barked in the distance, one after another. Slowly she raised a hand and touched her own forehead. Not hot. Not a hallucination. The voice sounded again. "Does host accept?" Shen Qingci closed her eyes and took a deep breath. When she opened them again, the confusion was gone, replaced by nothing but ruthlessness. Whatever it was. Demon or ghost, blessing or curse. As long as it let her survive, let her reclaim the suffering of her past life, she would take it all. Accept. As the words fell, a boom echoed in her mind. Countless images and texts flooded in: how to turn the soil, how to fertilize, how to thin seedlings, how to prevent pests. Clear as if she had always known them. And a small space, gray and misty, with a well in the middle. The well water was clear, shimmering with an indescribable light. Shen Qingci stood for a long time. Until Qingci returned carrying water, and poured it with a splash into the jar. Second miss. He wiped his sweat. The jar is full. I'll go now. Shen Qingci turned to look at him. Wait. Qingci stopped. Shen Qingci walked back into the house, took the smallest piece of silver from the bundle, about 3 chan in weight. She clutched it in her palm, walked out, and handed it to Qingci. Take this, get a doctor for your mother. Qingci's eyes went round his hand, pulling back. No. I can't. It's a loan. Shen Qingci pressed the silver into his hand. After your mother recovers, you can work off the debt by helping me with some tasks. Qingci looked at the silver in his hand, then up at Shen Qingci. He stared for a long time, then his eyes reddened. Second miss. I will definitely repay you. He clutched the silver, turned and ran. After he had left the yard, he turned back and yelled, "I'll be back tomorrow." His footsteps faded. Shen Qingci stood in the yard looking at the full water jar. The sun was almost setting, the sky a bloody red. She turned and went back inside, closing the door. From her bosom she drew the small cloth bundle, opened it, took out her birth mother's silver hairpin and tucked it into her hair. Then she sat on the Kong and retrieved the cabbage seed packet from the system space. An oil paper packet heavy in her hand. She opened it and grabbed a handful. The seeds were plump, showing a healthy brown. Plant them. 10 days to germinate, a month to leaf out, 2 months to harvest. 1 mu could produce 2,000 jin. 10 mu, that was 20,000 jin. In the town market, cabbage sold at 2 per jin. 20,000 jin. Shen Qingci clenched the seeds. Her nails dug into her palm, leaving deep impressions. From outside came Nanny Zhao's shout, "Food." Waiting to be invited. Shen Qingci put the seeds away and got up to go out. The kitchen was in the western part of the yard, small and decrepit. Nanny Zhao was already seated at the table, before her a bowl of thin porridge and 2 black wheat buns. When she saw Shen Qingci come in, Nanny Zhao didn't even lift her eyelids. "Yours is on the stove." Shen Qingci walked over. On the stove sat a bowl of even thinner porridge, mostly water with a few vegetable leaves floating. There was only 1 bun, hard as rock. She picked up the bowl and sat across from Nanny Zhao. Nanny Zhao bit into her bun, chewing noisily. "Second miss, don't mind my saying. The way you acted today, that's not fit for a lady. Tangling with a farm boy. If word gets out, where will the Marquis mansion's face go?" Shen Qingci took a sip. "Cold." "You're right, Nanny," she said, setting down the bowl. "Then I won't go out starting tomorrow. I'll just rest in the room and recover. As for the monthly allowance, I'll write to ask the madam. Nanny can help me post the letter." Nanny Zhao choked. She stared at Shen Qingci, the bun in her hand crushed out of shape. "You? Still talking about silver? Why not?" Shen Qingci looked back at her. "I'm sick, I need medicine." "Without silver how can I get medicine? If Nanny thinks it's improper, then I'll speak to the manor steward, and have him send someone to the mansion to inquire. The steward wouldn't take my silver either, would he?" Nanny Zhao's face turned bright red. "What nonsense are you talking? Who took your silver?" "I didn't say you took it, Nanny." Shen Qingci's tone was placid. "I only said the silver has disappeared. It's worth looking for. If we can't find it, we have to ask. Don't you agree, Nanny?" Nanny Zhao's chest heaved violently. She stared at Shen Qingci as if looking at a monster. This second daughter was truly different. Not a forced toughness, but a coldness that seeped from the marrow. That cold made Nanny Zhao's back go chilly. "Hey, I've kept the silver safe." Nanny Zhao squeezed the words through her teeth. "The madam said you were young, afraid you'd squander it. I'll keep it safe for you first. Then give it to me now." Shen Qingci extended her hand. "I need to get medicine. Tomorrow. I'll give it to you tomorrow." "Fine." Shen Qingci withdrew her hand. "Then I'll wait for you tomorrow, Nanny." Having said that, she continued to drink her porridge 1 sip at a time, very slowly. Nanny Zhao sat across from her, no longer able to eat her bun. She stared at Shen Qingci, her mind racing. This girl cannot be kept. She needed to find a way to make her sicker. Too sick to speak, to write. Too sick to slip quietly away. A cruel gleam flashed in Nanny Zhao's eyes. Shen Qingci had down drinking porridge, didn't see it, but she felt it. That malice, exactly the same as in her past life. She set down her bowl and stood up. "I'm done. Nanny, enjoy your meal." Returning to her room, she closed the door. Shen Qingci walked to the window and peered through the hole. It was already pitch black. The yard was dark with only a dim yellow light spilling from the kitchen. She turned and brought out the cabbage seed packet from her bosom. The oil paper packet was heavy in her hand. System, she called silently. Here. The spiritual spring water. Can I take it now? Yes. Limit it to 1 bowl per day. Shen Qingci concentrated and a coarse porcelain bowl appeared in her hand. It was filled with clear water shimmering with a faint, almost invisible luster. She raised the bowl and took a sip. The water was very sweet. A warm current slid down her throat, spreading through her limbs. The fatigue and chill that had weighed on her body eased noticeably. Good stuff. Shen Qingci carefully poured the remaining water back into the space. The bowl vanished. She walked to the Kong and lay down. The earthen bed was painfully hard, but she was too tired. From her rebirth until now her nerves had been stretched taut. Now that she could relax, sleep crashed over her like a tidal wave. Before closing her eyes, she made one last mental plan. Tomorrow Nanny Zhao would give the silver. If she didn't shed, make a scene. With the silver shed, first go to town to buy some medicine as a pretense, then purchase necessities. Then find land. There seemed to be a patch of wasteland behind the manor. Untended. She needed to check it. Grow cabbages. 2 months. Just 2 months. Shen Qingci clenched her fist, her nails digging into her palm once more. This time she would not die. She would live. Life better than anyone. Outside the window the moon rose. Pale light streamed into the broken room, falling on the curled figure on the Kong. She was asleep. Her brows still knitted. In her hand she clutched the seed packet tightly as if it were her only lifeline. Shen Qingci was awakened by the cold. The chill from the earthen bed pierced through her bones like countless fine needles. She opened her eyes. The sky had not yet fully brightened and a gray light seeped through the holes in the worn window paper. She curled up, clutching the packet of cabbage seeds tightly against her chest, the seeds pressing painfully into her palm. The pain kept her awake. She sat up slowly and gently. Through the thin earthen wall came the snoring of Nanny Zhao from next door, rising and falling like a worn bellows. Shen Qingci got off the Kong, walked to the corner where a cracked water vat stood, scooped half a ladle of cold water and drank it slowly. The icy liquid slid down her throat, making her shiver, but it thoroughly dispelled the last remnants of drowsiness. System. She silently called in her mind. Yes. The cold mechanical voice answered on time. Spiritual spring water. With a slight shift of her mind, the coarse porcelain bowl appeared in her hand again. The water in the bowl was still clear with an extremely faint, almost imperceptible luster. She did not drink immediately, but first walked to the window, examining the water carefully in the dim light. It seemed a bit clearer than last night. She raised the bowl and took a small sip. Sweet. A gentle warmth instantly spread from her throat, not as surging as last night but more prolonged, seeping into every limb and bone. The joints, frozen overnight, seemed a bit looser, even her breathing smoother. Good stuff. Truly good stuff. She carefully poured the remaining water back into the space and the bowl disappeared. Then she walked to the blurry bronze mirror, if it could still be called a mirror, and looked at the reflection inside. Thin, sallow complexion, hair withered like autumn grass. Only her eyes were dark and deep, devoid of any cowardice or confusion belonging to her age. There was only a coldness tempered like ice, and beneath it a churning hatred barely contained. She raised her hand, slowly combed her disheveled hair and meticulously tied it into a simple bun with a plain silver hairpin. The person in the mirror remained shabby, but her back was straight. Shen Qingci, she said silently to the person in the mirror, in this life you must stand tall. The sound of cooking came from the kitchen. Nanny Zhao was up. Shen Qingci pushed open the door and went out. Nanny Zhao was busy at the stove, not even lifting her eyelids when she saw her, just snorting. Mrs. up quite early. Pity this old woman's hands are slow. A breakfast will take a while. No hurry. Shen Qingci walked to the well in the yard, drew half a bucket of water herself, and washed up with the icy well water. Nanny Zhao eyed her nimble moves from the corner, and the discomfort in her heart grew stronger. This girl had been off since yesterday. No crying, no fuss, few words, but a chilling gaze. How could she be like a 14-year-old concubine's daughter, who had never experienced anything? Miss Nanny Zhao placed 2 black flour buns and a bowl of thin porridge on the wobbly broken table, forcing a fake smile. The estate is austere, not like the Marquis manor. You'll have to make do. This old woman is just following orders. As for the monthly allowance. She drew out her tone, observing Shen Qingci's expression. Shen Qingci sat down, picked up a bun, broke it open and ate it slowly. The bun was hard and rough, scraping her throat. She swallowed it without changing expression, then looked up at Nanny Zhao. Nanny is right. Since mother sent me to the estate for quiet recuperation, all expenses should naturally come from my monthly allowance. Her voice was calm without any fluctuation. As I recall, my monthly allowance is 2 silver taels. Mother was kind, perhaps fearing I might be inconvenienced upon arrival. She had you bring it along, didn't she? Nanny Zhao's fake smile stiffened. 2 taels. Lady Wang had only given her 1, saying, "A dying woman doesn't need so much, you decide the rest." Well. Nanny Zhao rolled her eyes. The lady did give some silver for me to manage. But you don't know, miss, this remote estate makes purchases difficult. Prices are high. Settling in yesterday, buying some simple bedding and utensils, cost quite a bit. The rest must be carefully budgeted for your medicine and daily needs. Shen Qingci put down the half-eaten bun, picked up the bowl of thin porridge and slowly stirred it with her chopsticks. Nanny has worked hard. Her tone remained flat. May I ask what was purchased yesterday? How much silver was spent? Are there receipts? I may be young, but I should learn to manage my own expenses. Give me the accounts and the remaining silver, and I won't trouble you with these trivial matters in the future. Nanny Zhao's face changed color. Receipts. Accounts. This damned girl actually dared. Miss doesn't trust this old woman. Nanny Zhao pulled a long face, her voice sharpening. This old woman was sent by the lady to take care of you. If you behave like this and word gets back to the manor, it won't look good, will it? If the lady finds out that you don't appreciate your servants, and have chilled this old woman's heart in the future. Nanny. Shen Qingci interrupted her, looking up. Those dark eyes gazed over, showing no emotion, but they choked off the rest of Nanny Zhao's threat in her throat. Mother sent you to look after me. Shen Qingci enunciated each word clearly and slowly. If I should fall seriously ill here or meet with some accident, do you think mother will reward you for your efficiency or deem you incompetent, unable even to watch over one person properly? Nanny Zhao's heart leaped sharply. This girl. What did she mean by that? Did she know something? Impossible. She's a concubine's daughter raised deep in the boudoir. What could she possibly understand? But those eyes were too calm to make one's skin crawl. Shen Qingci saw her suddenly changing expression, and knew the warning had hit its mark. She stopped pressing, her tone softening but carrying an unyielding insistence. I remember Nanny's hard work. But since I'm here, I must learn to stand on my own. Please hand over the monthly allowance today. From now on I will manage all purchases and expenses in the estate. Nanny is advanced in years and should take it easy. Carrot and stick. Nanny Zhao's chest heaved as she stared at Shen Qingci as if seeing her for the first time. The contempt and manipulative intentions she had harbored were riddled with holes under the girl's icy gaze and words that were sharp yet justified. She thought of Lady Wang's hints and the benefits she might pocket. How could she just let it go? No, this girl couldn't stay. If she stayed, not only would she get no pickings, but she might even be bitten back. She must act quickly. Nanny Zhao suppressed the venom surging in her heart and squeezed out an even uglier smile. Since Miss insists. Fine. The silver. This old woman will give it to you this afternoon. But the estate is austere and Miss health is weak. You must be careful in all things. Thank you for your reminder, Nanny. Shen Qingci lowered her eyes and continued drinking the thin porridge as if the confrontation had never happened. Nanny Zhao stared at her lowered, seemingly docile profile, almost twisting the rag in her hand. This girl couldn't stay. She had to find a way to make her sicker. Sick enough to be unable to speak or write. Sick enough to disappear silently. Shen Qingci lowered her head and drank her porridge, not seeing it. But she felt it. That familiar sticky malice coiled around her again like an icy snake. Exactly the same as in the previous life. She set down the bowl. The base hit the broken wooden table with a soft tap. I'm done. She stood up, her voice betraying no emotion. Take your time, Nanny. Returning to her room, she closed the door. Shen Qingci leaned against the cold door panel and slowly exhaled the pent-up breath she had been holding in her chest. Her palms were covered in cold sweat. Forcing Nanny Zhao to hand over the silver was only the first step. She knew it had further provoked the woman's murderous intent. Time was running out. She had to be faster. She walked to the window and looked out through the hole. The sky was already bright. An overcast day with gray clouds hanging low. The yard was still desolate with broken farming tools piled in the corner. There was a patch of wasteland behind the estate. She had to go check. Today she must get the silver. Must find the land. She turned around and once again pulled out the packet of cabbage seeds from her bosom. The oil paper packet was warm from her body heat, resting heavily in her palm. System, she called in her mind. Yes. High-quality cabbage seeds, growth cycle shortened to 2 months, yield up to 2,000 gene per mu, excellent taste and quality. Confirm. Confirmed. Spiritual spring water can be used for irrigation. Once daily accelerates growth, slightly improves soil long-term. Use has optimization effects. Confirm. Shen Qingci tightened her grip on the oil paper packet. 10 mu of wasteland. 2 months. 20,000 gene of cabbages. This wasn't cabbages. This was the first brick to pry open fate, the first slap aimed at those who wished for her silent death. The light outside fell on her clenched fist, the knuckles whitening with effort. A way out is never something you wait for. It's something you dig out inch by inch from the depths of despair. Shen Qingci was awakened by the cold. It was not the chill of a light slumber but a bone-deep penetrating dampness unique to the manor. The earthen bed was as hard as a slab of stone, the thin quilt utterly inadequate against the wind seeping through the cracks in the broken window. She opened her eyes, fixed her gaze upon the dark cobweb-draped beam overhead, and blinked slowly, letting her chaotic thoughts reorder into clarity. In her past life the end had also been cold. But then it was a cold of the heart, the cold of blood draining away drop by drop. She sat up, her movements somewhat stiff. She had slept in her clothes the night before, the threadbare padded jacket insufficient against the chill. She rubbed her reddened fingers, walked to the door, and listened intently to the sounds outside. In the courtyard there were deliberately muffled footsteps and a low venomous muttering. Hey, little vixen, still daring to ask me for silver. See how long you can be smug. It was old Mammy Zhao. Shen Qingci's gaze was placid and undisturbed. She pulled open the door and the pale gray light of dawn flooded in, carrying the scent of earth and withered grass. Old Mammy Zhao was sweeping the fallen leaves in the yard with the broom, making desultory strokes. When she saw Shen Qingci emerge, a sickeningly false smile instantly plastered itself across her face. Miss is awake. There's congee warming on the stove. This old woman will fetch it for you immediately. Thank you, Mammy. Shen Qingci replied in a faint voice, walking to the broken water vat in the yard, scooping up a ladle of cold water and carefully washing herself. The icy water stung her skin, sharpening her senses. Breakfast was as always congee so thin it reflected one's image, accompanied by a coarse hard black wheat bun that threatened to break her teeth. Shen Qingci sat down without changing expression, her back ramrod straight. She picked up the bun and ate it in small but resolute bites. Each mouthful was a struggle, but she knew she needed strength. Old Mammy Zhao stood to one side, her eyes like poisoned hooks scraping over Shen Qingci's form back and forth. Finally unable to contain herself any longer, she rubbed her hands together and forced a look of difficulty onto her face. Miss, you see, the expenses on the estate are rather large and I truly find myself in straitened circumstances. About the monthly allowance you mentioned yesterday. Shen Qingci set down the half-finished bowl of congee. The base struck the rickety wooden table with a crisp sound. She raised her eyes and fixed them on old Mammy Zhao. That gaze was terrifyingly calm. No anger, no pleading, only a chilling depth that saw through everything. You're short of funds, Mammy, she said, her voice low but each word distinct. And yet I heard that just a few days ago you had someone send 2 taels worth of dried meat and fine cloth to the city for your little grandson, didn't you? The estate may be austere, but Mammy is certainly generous to your family. The fake smile on old Mammy Zhao's face instantly froze, a flicker of panic flashing in her eyes before being replaced by a deeper venom. She had never expected that this sequestered low-born daughter would know even such things. Mrs. listening to some loose-tongued gossip. She forced a smile and began to defend herself. Whether it's gossip or not, Mammy knows in your heart. Shen Qingci interrupted, her gaze falling on old Mammy Zhao's rough labor-worn hands now unconsciously curling inward. The Marquis mansion has its rules. The legitimate wife sent Mammy here to look after me, and the monthly allowance is set by the household. If I were to fall gravely ill here or meet with some mishap. She paused, watching old Mammy Zhao's pupils contract sharply, then slowly uttered the rest. Do you think the mistress would reward you for your efficiency or punish you for negligent care and embezzlement of the master's provisions? At that point it won't just be 2 taels worth of dried meat. All the savings you've hoarded over these years will be swallowed up. The air seemed to crystallize. The muscles on old Mammy Zhao's face twitched, the false smile could no longer hold. The venom churning in her eyes nearly overflowed. She stared hard at Shen Qingci as if seeing for the first time this low-born daughter she had always considered malleable putty. When had this girl become so sharp-tongued, so terrifying? Since Miss puts it that way. Old Mammy Zhao forced the words through clenched teeth, each one dripping with rank. Since Miss puts it that way. Old Mammy Zhao forced the words through clenched teeth, each one dripping with rancor and resentment. Then very well. The silver. I will bring it to Miss this afternoon. She squeezed out a smile uglier than a grimace. But the estate is barren and Miss' constitution is weak. You must take care in everything. Thank you for your reminder, Mammy. Shen Qingci lowered her eyes and continued drinking the watery congee, as if the sharp-edged confrontation had never occurred. But old Mammy Zhao stared at her lowered, seemingly docile profile, nearly twisting the rag in her hand to shreds. This girl cannot be allowed to live. She must think of a way to make her illness worse. So severe that she can't speak or write. So severe that she vanishes without a sound. Shen Qingci, head down, sipping congee, did not see. But she felt it. That familiar viscous malice, like a cold viper, coiled around her again, clearer and more impatient than before. Exactly as in her past life. Only this time she was no longer the Shen Qingci who could only passively endure and die in despair. She set down the bowl. The base again struck the table with a faint tap. "I've finished," she said, rising, her voice betraying no ripple. "Mammy, take your time." She turned and went back into her room, closing the door. Leaning against the icy door panel, she finally let out a long breath she had been holding in her chest. Her palms were covered in cold sweat. Forcing old Mammy Zhao to hand over the silver was only the first step. She knew it had only sharpened the woman's murderous intent. Time was running out. She must be faster. Walking to the window, she peered through a hole in the paper. The day was already bright but still overcast. The gray clouds hung low and heavy, as if they might fall at any moment. The courtyard remained desolate, with broken farming tools piled in the corner thick with dust. There was a patch of wasteland behind the estate. She needed to go see it. Today she must get the silver. Must find the land. She turned and once again drew out the packet of cabbage seeds from her bosom. The rough oilpaper wrapper, warmed by her body heat, felt heavy in her palm, like a beating heart. "System," she silently called. "Here." That cold mechanical voice promptly answered. "Premium cabbage seeds, growth cycle shortened to 2 months, yield up to 2,000 gene per mu with excellent taste and quality." "Confirm." "Confirm." "Spiritual spring water can be used for irrigation once per day to accelerate growth, slightly improve soil quality, and provide long-term optimization effects." "Confirm." "Confirm." Shen Qingci clenched the oilpaper packet, her knuckles whitening from the pressure. 10 mu of wasteland. 2 months. 20,000 gene of cabbages. This was not merely cabbage. This was the first brick to pry open her fate, the first slap against those who wished her to die in silence, the first ray of hope she would dig for herself out of this man-devouring mire. The light outside, filtering through the broken hole, fell upon her clenched fist. That faint glimmer seemed to carry a burning warmth. A way out was never something you waited for. It was something you dug out inch by inch from the abyss of despair with your own hands. That afternoon old Mammy Zhao indeed came. Her face was as dark as dripping water. She threw a dusty old money pouch onto the rickety table in Shen Qingci's room with a sharp smack. "Count it, miss. 2 taels of silver, not a cent less," she said in a harsh tone, her eyes slithering like vipers over Shen Qingci's face. "As for those 10 mu of wasteland behind the estate, if miss wants them, go take a look. But I'll warn you up front, that land is barren, full of rocks, and long neglected. Nothing will grow on it. Don't waste your effort only to end up disappointed." The last 2 words she uttered with undisguised malice and a gloating anticipation. Shen Qingci picked up the pouch. It was weighty in her hand. Rough bits of silver. She did not count them, simply tucked it into her bosom, then looked up at old Mammy Zhao. "Thank you for your trouble, Mammy. Whether the land is good or not, one must try to know." Her tone was so composed that it deflated old Mammy Zhao's expectation of seeing her flustered or enraged, only adding to the old woman's vexation. "Humph." Old Mammy Zhao snorted through her nose and turned away, her steps heavy and loud. As soon as she was gone, Shen Qingci closed the door and carefully hid the 2 taels of silver. Then she changed into the most worn yet tidy clothes. She had used a wooden hairpin to simply knot up her long hair, pushed open the door, and walked straight toward the back of the estate. The estate was small, and behind it lay a gentle slope that connected to the foot of the distant mountains. Those 10 mu of so-called wasteland were on that slope. Upon closer inspection, the situation was even worse than imagined. The soil was a barren yellowish-brown, severely compacted with sparse patches of withered weeds and thorny bushes. Rocks of various sizes were half buried in the earth. As far as the eye could see, it was a dead, desolate expanse. In the distance, the mountains loomed darkly beneath low-hanging clouds, making the land seem utterly lifeless. Anyone seeing such a place would likely feel despair. But Shen Qingci stood at the edge of the field, the wind blowing her thin clothes, and she took a slow, deep breath. This was it. She crouched down and grabbed a handful of soil. It was dry, hard, and rough, utterly lacking in fertility. But she pressed her fingertips into it, feeling its texture, and her eyes grew brighter. Barren, compacted, rocky. No matter. She had seeds. She had spiritual spring water. She straightened up, her gaze sweeping across the 10 mu of wasteland, as if she could already see the scene 2 months later, green leaves surging, abundant harvest. Just then the corner of her eye caught a trace of something at the edge of the wasteland near the forest, a small patch that seemed to have been cleared with a few plants that did not look like weeds. Her heart stirred and she instinctively took a few steps in that direction. Suddenly an extremely subtle sensation of being watched crept up her spine without warning. Cold, piercing, full of scrutiny. As if a pair of eyes in the shadows was silently, loftily gazing at her. Shen Qingci's steps halted abruptly, the blood in her veins seemed to freeze for a moment. She remained half-turned, not immediately looking back, but her fingernails dug into her palm. Who else besides old Mammy Zhao and the tenant farmers could be near this estate? Who was it? Who was it? That gaze, tangible as substance, froze icily on the back of her neck. Shen Qingci did not move. The wind rustled through the withered grass of the wasteland, a soft whisper. The distant forest lay dark and still like a crouching beast. She could even feel her own heartbeat, steady and slow within her chest. One beat then another, utterly out of place in this dead silence. It was not Nanny Zhao. That old hag's footsteps were heavy and turbid, carrying an impatient malice. But this gaze, too quiet, too heavy, bearing a nearly indifferent scrutiny, as if appraising an object or an intruder. She slowly, with utmost naturalness, straightened up as if merely her legs had grown numb from squatting. Her gaze still lingered on the tidy traces in several peculiar plants. A few clumps of mint and some purslane with thick fleshy leaves growing far more vigorously than the surrounding weeds, clearly tended by someone. So besides the tenant farmer, someone else lived near this estate. And at the edge of the forest. Shen Qingci loosened the pressure of her fingertips, leaving deep crescent marks on her palm. She turned to face the forest, her gaze sweeping calmly over it. Shadows of trees, jagged rocks. Nothing seemed amiss. Yet the feeling of being watched did not dissipate. Friend or foe unknown, but at least the other had not revealed themselves immediately, meaning they too were observing. Suddenly she bent down, picked up a sharp-edged stone from the ground, weighed it, then walked over to the mint and began digging at the hardened soil beside it, clumsily using the stone's edge. Her movements were unfamiliar, her strength slight, entirely that of a sheltered young lady who had never done farm work, attempting a futile struggle in desperation. She needed to convey a message, a helpless, powerless, utterly lost daughter of the Marquis, abandoned to her fate, harmless, even pitiable. The stone scraped against the hard clods, producing a grating sound. She dug slowly, as soon fine beads of sweat appeared on her forehead, rolling down her pale cheeks. The thin old clothes clung to her body in the wind, outlining a frame far too slender. Anyone who saw this scene would think it filled with pathos and weakness. The gaze from the shadows seemed to pause for a moment. Shen Qingci acted as if she hadn't noticed, focusing only on wrestling with the hard earth. Only when her fingertips were rubbed red by the stone's edge did she finally loosen a small clod. She stopped, breathing slightly heavily, raised her arm to wipe sweat with her sleeve, her eyes hollow as she stared at the vast barrenness ahead. Her lips moved faintly as if talking to herself, her voice nearly carried away by the wind. Tenmu 20,000 Jin, how could that be? Her tone carried just the right note of bewilderment and despair. Then, as if spent of all strength, she released her hand limply. The stone rolled to the ground. She squatted there, hugging her knees, burying her face in her arms, her shoulders trembling almost imperceptibly. Like a girl pushed to the brink, finally breaking down. The wind grew colder. Deep in the forest, behind a shadow of a massive boulder, Xiao Heng leaned against the icy rock, clad in coarse cloth that nearly merged with the gray-brown stone. His figure stood tall as a pine, yet all outward aura was restrained like a crouching leopard. His face was expressionless, but his eyes were dark and piercing, silently watching the slender, trembling figure at the edge of the wasteland through a crevice in the rock. He had been living here for 3 months. This wasteland, close to the forest and far from the farmhouses, was usually desolate. Today an uninvited guest had arrived. The Marquis's banished concubine-born daughter. He had seen her when she alighted from the carriage. Her back straight as a rod, her eyes cold as ice, nothing like a maiden who had just suffered a blow and should be bewildered and helpless. That look reminded him of certain beasts that fight back in desperate situations. Alert, calm, hiding sharp claws. So he had paid extra attention. Now, watching her clumsily dig in the wasteland, and then squat to weep, Xiao Heng's eyes showed no ripple, only a cold scrutiny. Her act wasn't bad. The trembling shoulders, the lowered head. Indeed, the picture of despair. His gaze flicked to the spot she had dug. The marks were laughably shallow, more like a sketch than actual, and when she wiped sweat, her sleeve passed over her cheek too swiftly and cleanly, as if wiping away something that shouldn't be there rather than tears. Most importantly, when she whispered earlier, her voice was despairing, but the fingers holding her knees were steady, gripping her arms without the slightest tremor. A truly broken person would have curled fingers, limp hands. She was pretending. Why? A concubine-born daughter abandoned by her family and exiled to this desolate estate. Despair would be a perfectly normal reaction. Why deliberately fake an even more fragile, more helpless appearance? For whom? For him. Xiao Heng's gaze suddenly sharpened like a blade. Did she know someone was watching? When had she noticed? How? He prided himself on his concealment skills. His aura was perfectly restrained. Even a first-rate master might not detect him at this distance. This Marquis's concubine-born daughter was no simpleton. Or perhaps, was her exile here merely a result of inner court intrigue? Could it be she was sent after him? Some kind of probe? Thoughts flashed through Xiao Heng's mind like lightning, finally settling into deeper vigilance and coldness. His aura grew denser, stiller, as if merging completely with the rock. At the edge of the wasteland, after crying for a while, Shen Qingci slowly rose. She seemed calmer, but her eyes remained dull with a numb resignation. She cast a last glance at the mint and purslane, then at the vast barren land, sighed softly, turned and walked back toward the estate, her steps faltering. Her slender figure disappeared at the end of the dirt path. Only when the figure was completely out of sight did Xiao Heng step silently out from behind the boulder. He walked to where Shen Qingci had been crouched down, first eyeing the marks left by her digging, pinched a clod of earth lightly between his fingers, then shifted his gaze to the vigorous mint and purslane. He had planted these casually to use when necessary and to mask traces of human activity near the forest edge. She had noticed. Not only noticed but deliberately came over to inspect. Xiao Heng stood up, gazing in the direction of Shen Qingci's departure, his eyes dark as night. Was this Shen Qingci merely a desperate, scheming concubine-born daughter with no way out, or a pawn sent here with a hidden purpose? He needed to find out. Back in the shabby room, Shen Qingci closed the door, leaned against the cold wooden plank, and slowly exhaled the stale breath she had held in her chest. The place where she had dug her nails into her palm throbbed faintly. That icy gaze from a moment ago was no illusion. The other was extremely skilled at concealment. And very dangerous. The scrutiny in that gaze was utterly cold, more like assessing a threat level. Feigning weakness was her only choice at the moment. With friend or foe unknown and strength imbalanced, disguising herself as harmless or even pitiable prey was the way to lower the other's guard and buy time. But would the other believe it? Shen Qingci walked to the window, peered through the torn window paper at the gentle slope behind the estate and the somber forest beyond. Twilight deepened, the forest's outline became a thick black silhouette, as if hiding countless secrets. That person, did he live in the mountains? Or was he only temporarily hidden there? Was he connected to this estate or the Marquis's household? Questions swirled in her mind, but Shen Qingci's gaze gradually settled, even calmer than it had been in the wasteland. An unknown threat was indeed unsettling, but compared to the open wolves in the Marquis's residence, a hidden observer might not be entirely bad. At least Nanny Zhao did not know of his existence. That meant a variable. And what Shen Qingci needed most now was a variable to break the deadlock. She turned away from the window, walked to the only dilapidated wooden table in the room, and took out the pouch containing 2 liang of loose silver. She also touched the old wooden hairpin left by her birth mother, hidden close to her body. The top priority was survival. To grow those 20,000 gene of cabbage. She needed tools, she needed hands, she needed to bring this wasteland to life as soon as possible. The seeds were ready, but before sowing she had to improve the soil just a little. Even a small patch to create The seeds were ready, but before sowing she had to improve the soil just a little. Even a small patch to create a semblance of hope, so she could have a reason to hire farmhands and later explain the miracle. Tomorrow she would go find the estate head. No matter who was hiding in the forest, danger or opportunity. She had to first secure a foothold on this barren land. Night fell completely. No lamp was lit in the shabby room, everything was dark. Shen Qingci lay fully clothed on the cold hard plank bed, eyes open, staring at the vague outline of the rafters above. From the direction of the forest all was silent. But she knew a pair of eyes might be staring through the darkness at this broken little cottage if she had lit a lamp. And she too in the darkness quietly awaited dawn. Awaited the moment to break the game. The short hoe lay in her palm, cold and weighty, with the unique rough texture of mountain stone grinding. Its blade under the sliver of moonlight condensed a faint sharp gleam. The small oil paper bundle was not large. Pinched in her hand she could feel the plum seeds within, slightly pricking her fingertips. There was no note, no sound, not even a trace of lingering breath. Like a night mist drifting through the mountain forest, it silently passed, leaving only these 2 items as proof that those eyes had not only witnessed her miracle but had also offered a response. Shen Qingci leaned against the cold door panel, slowly exhaling the breath she had been holding. Her heart pounded a bit faster in her chest, not from fear but from a complex thrill of being completely seen yet silently caught. He had seen through it. Seen through her meager spiritual spring trick, the calculations beneath her feigned resilience, and perhaps even the deep secret of her rebirth. At the very least he had discerned her difference. Yet he did not expose her nor use this as leverage. Instead he sent tools and seeds. This was more chilling than outright malice, and it also loosened a crack in the depths of her heart. She walked to the window gazing once more at the somber mountain forest. The night was thick as ink obscuring everything. But she knew he might be somewhere also looking at this broken window that had once framed her silhouette. This silent standoff had transformed from a one-sided scrutiny into a two-way obscure exchange. An olive branch, or a honey-coated probe. Shen Qingci tucked the short hoe and seeds close to her body. The metallic chill seeped through her thin clothes, soothing her skin. She needed to think carefully. At the break of dawn the village was thoroughly stirred by that unimaginable patch of green. Qingci too was the first to run over. He had only risen early to fetch water from the stream, and when he passed the wasteland he nearly thought his eyes were playing tricks on him. Where yesterday there had only been tender green sprouts overnight, the leaves had unfurled lush and thick, a vibrant green against the surrounding withered desolation, growing with an almost uncanny vigor. He rubbed his eyes, crouched down and carefully touched a leaf. It was real, brimming with life and resilience. Alive. Truly alive. He murmured, then as if burned leaped up and ran back toward the village, shouting as he went, alive. Miss Shen's cabbages are alive. They've grown so well. This cry, like a stone thrown into stagnant water, stirred ripples. The numb tenant farmers poked their heads out from their dilapidated huts, gathering at the field with skepticism. When they saw the incongruous thriving green, suppressed exclamations and murmurs erupted from the crowd. Incredible! This land can grow things. Look at those leaves, green as dripping oil. Could this Miss Shen really have something? Old Madame Zhao was awakened by the noise. She threw on a robe, shuffled her slippers and approached with curses. What's all this wailing at dawn? Before she could finish, her eyes widened, her mouth half open, and the words caught in her throat, turning into a short gasp. The sneer and smugness on her face like frozen grease stiffened at the corners of her mouth, then shattered bit by bit, revealing an incredulous panic beneath. This? How is this possible? Zhuangtou Li Dashan also arrived at the news. He was more composed than old Madame Zhao, but after crouching to examine the field for a long while, and rubbing a handful of soil between his fingers, the suspicion in his eyes grew heavier. The soil was still the same compacted loess, yet the vegetables in this small patch grew as if nourished by immortal fertilizer. He looked up at Shen Qingci standing quietly to the side. The girl still wore that faded, washed-out old dress, her figure delicate, standing in the cool morning breeze as if she might snap at any moment. Yet her spine was straight and her face bore no ecstatic expression, only a calm bordering on indifference. As the sun rose it cast a pale golden halo on her pallid profile. Her overly composed eyes, now reflecting that vivid green, exuded a serene power that was hard to look upon directly. Miss Shen, Li Dashan said, standing up and brushing the dirt from his hands. His tone held a hint of careful deliberation absent yesterday. These cabbages. They've grown quite well. He paused, then probed, did you use any special method? Shen Qingci tilted her head slightly, her gaze passing over old Madame Zhao's contorted face to rest on Li Dashan. Her voice was clear but devoid of warmth. I merely followed an ancient text, choosing a shaded corner near water, deeply tilled the soil and watered it a few extra times. Perhaps the seeds were lucky and the land's vitality hadn't fully expired. She spoke lightly, attributing everything to ancient texts, luck and land vitality. But everyone knew the village had lain barren for years. Many seasoned farmers had tried and failed. How could she, a marquis daughter who had just arrived a few days ago, using her meager funds to hire help and working with her own hands, grow such unbelievable vegetables? No one believed that explanation. Yet precisely because of this disbelief it stirred more awe and suspicion. Old Madame Zhao finally snapped out of her shock, and shrieked, you must have used some sorcery. How could this dead land? Madame Shen Qingci interrupted, her gaze calm as she looked at her. There was no anger, no grievance in her eyes, only a chilling insight. If the vegetables grow well, the village will have a better harvest at year's end. That benefits the Marquis estate, the village head and everyone. If you think it's sorcery, why not wait until they are fully grown and send them personally to the estate? Let my mother and father and the high officials in the capital examine them. She deftly invoked the Marquis estate and high officials in the capital. Old Madame Zhao was like a chicken with its neck wrung, her face flushing red. Yet she dared not utter the word sorcery again. Even in her stupidity she knew that if this reached the Marquis estate, Lady Wang would be the first to deal with her for incompetence and false accusations. Li Dashan's eyes flickered. He quickly smoothed things over. Miss Shen is right. Good harvests are an auspicious sign. Everyone disperse. Go about your business. He shooed away the gathered tenants, then cupped his hands to Shen Qingci, his manner notably more respectful. Miss has worked hard. These cabbages still need careful tending. If you need anything, just say the word. Shen Qingci gave a slight nod and said no more. She knew this first step had barely been secured. The miracle nurtured by the spiritual spring was both her shield and her death warrant. It had rekindled hope in the eyes of Chen Qingci and others, drawn Li Dashan's cautious calculations, and stirred deeper envy and unease in old Madame Zhao. And in the shadows another pair of eyes assessed everything. She turned and walked back to her small oasis, crouching down to gently stroke a cool thick leaf with her finger. The genuine life force of the plant transmitted through her fingertips, quietly kindling a faint warmth in her cold heart. This was the first thread of hope she had wrested from desperation with her own hands. In the following days, Shen Qingci's life seemed to settle into a routine. Every morning she went to the field to check on the cabbage's growth. The effect of the spiritual spring was astonishing. The patch of green visibly expanded and grew lusher, becoming a striking and tempting miracle in the wasteland. The tenants' gazes toward her had completely changed, from numbness and pity to reverence mixed with a hint of eagerness. Chen Qingci even voluntarily took over the watering and weeding, working with extra vigor. Occasionally when he looked at Shen Qingci, his dark face would break into a simple hopeful smile. Old Madame Zhao quieted down considerably, but the venomous glint in her triangular eyes grew more intense each day. She no longer openly harassed her, but always lurked nearby, watching with a sinister air like a coiled viper. Shen Qingci pretended not to see. By day she tended the cabbages, by night under the oil lamp she pondered over the short hoe and the strange packet of seeds. She had cleaned the short hoe. Its handle was of hard ironwood, worn smooth and comfortable to grip, and the blade was razor-sharp, far better than any of the rusty tools in the village. As for the seeds, they were larger than cabbage seeds, dark brown with a faint peculiar fragrance like medicinal herbs. She couldn't identify them, but intuition told her they were no ordinary crop. What did he mean by giving her this? Was she supposed to plant them? Where? And then what? It was like a silent riddle, an invitation from the darkness, or rather a test. Shen Qingci picked up a seed and held it in her palm. It was cold and solid, as if containing an unknown vitality. She thought of the years before her rebirth, struggling to survive in the rear courtyard of the Marquis estate. No one had ever given her choices nor offered her seeds. Every path was a dead end, and every gift came with a price tag that drained her blood and marrow. But this time someone had reached across the wasteland and the mountain forest, handing her a silent, ambiguous possibility. The risk was immense. Once planted, it could invite unforeseen trouble, perhaps even expose the secret of the spiritual spring, and drag her into a deeper vortex. Yet, she looked out the window. In the darkness the cabbage field was a blur, but its vibrant life force seemed to pierce through the night. That was the first breach she had torn open in a deadlock with all her effort. If she stopped here, if she dared not accept this obscure gift out of fear, how would she be any different from the Shen Qingci of her past life, trapped in that rear courtyard? Reborn, she wanted more than just survival. She wanted to break the deadlock, to take revenge, to drag down all those who had trampled her. And for that she needed power, leverage, and variables. This short hoe and these seeds were the greatest variables at this moment. Shen Qingci closed her palm, clutching the seed tightly. A faint sting came, but it cleared her chaotic thoughts. She blew out the oil lamp and in the complete darkness silently made her decision. The next day she rose early. Instead of going to the cabbage field, she took the short hoe and a small basket and walked alone toward the most remote uninhabited slope at the edge of the wasteland where it met the mountain forest. She chose a small sheltered spot with slightly better soil. Using the unusually sharp short hoe she began to dig in silence and with force. The soil was turned, revealing deeper layers of color. Stroke after stroke. Sweat soon soaked her temples, dripping down her chin. Her slender arms trembled slightly from the effort, but her gaze was focused, her movements steady. She knew those eyes would see. She wanted him to see. She was responding to his gift in this most direct, most silent way, accepting his test while also showing her courage. When a small deep pit was dug, Shen Qingci took the oil paper bundle from her bosom, opened it, and carefully one by one sprinkled the dark brown medicinal scented seeds inside. Then she covered them with soil and gently pressed it firm. She did not use the spiritual spring. Not a single drop. These were his seeds. She planted them with only her hands and determination. Success or failure was part of their silent duel. After finishing, she stood up, brushed the dirt from her hands, and looked toward the mountain forest. The morning mist was dissipating, revealing the clear outlines of trees at the forest's edge, somber, still, and full of secrets. But this time the faintest curve touched the corner of Shen Qingci's mouth. A cold, sharp curve, the smile of a hunter. The seeds had been sown. Now it was time to see what kind of flowers would bloom and what fruit would bear. And you, the one hidden in the mountain forest, are you ready to have this pawn of yours turn and disrupt your game? When the morning mist completely dissipated, Shen Qingci returned to that dilapidated little courtyard. She washed her hands, changed out of the coarse cloth clothes stained with soil, her movements unhurried, as if what she had buried at the edge of the woods was not a perilous gambit but merely a few ordinary vegetable seeds. She washed her hands, changed out of the coarse cloth clothes stained with soil, her movements unhurried, as if what she had buried at the edge of the woods was not a perilous gambit but this only deepened the icy sharpness within her heart. After noon, the silence of the estate was shattered by a muffled commotion. Chen Qingci was the first to discover it. As he shouldered his hoe past the most barren cabbage patch at the eastern end of the estate, a plot that had yielded almost nothing for years, he stood frozen as if nailed to the ground, his hoe clattering to the earth with a bang. He gaped, his throat emitting hoarse sounds, his eyes bulging as he stared intently at the land. The seedlings, which had been withered yellow, sparse and half dead just yesterday, had transformed overnight. It was not an ordinary regreening but a nearly uncanny bursting emerald green. The leaves were thick and glossy, gleaming with a healthy, almost blinding luster under the afternoon sun. The plants stood tall and straight, crowding together, completely covering the bare yellow soil. The green was so dense it could not dissolve, the vitality so exuberant it seemed about to overflow, forming a stark and stunning contrast with the barren, lifeless fields around it. This was no natural growth for crops. It was nothing short of a miracle. Chen Qingci spun around and stumbled toward the dwelling of Li Dashan, the estate head, his voice distorted by extreme shock. Headman, something incredible has happened. The news spread like a drop of cold water into boiling oil, instantly exploding into an uproar. The numb tenant farmers were stirred, gathering in twos and threes. When they saw the appearance of that plot, gasps of disbelief and buzzing murmurs erupted from the crowd. Heavens! How did it grow like this? I saw it just yesterday, it was almost dead. It's that newly arrived young lady. She spent a good while here yesterday. Could it be the good fortune brought by the Marquis's daughter? Eyes full of awe, suspicion and ecstasy turned in unison toward that secluded little courtyard. The tenant farmers, whose backs had long been bent by poverty and toil, seemed to straighten slightly at the sight of this incredible green. It was not just a few vegetables. It was the hope of survival, the first ray of light breaking through the heavy despair pressing on their hearts. Zhao Momo was alerted by the crowd and came rushing over. When she pushed through and saw the dazzling green patch, the smugness lingering on her face from having cut Shen Qingci's rations instantly froze, then shattered into an incredulous, ferocious expression. Impossible! She screeched, rushing to the edge of the plot and reaching out to grab the thick leaves, but her fingertips trembled inexplicably when they touched the oily green, as if afraid of being scorched by such overwhelming vitality. You must have mistaken it. Or maybe this land is cursed. Nanny, an old tenant, whispered timidly with cautious reverence. Everyone saw it. It wasn't like this yesterday. The lady came, watered it, and then... Shut up. Zhao Momo whirled around, her eyes viciously stabbing at the tenant, her chest heaving violently. She recalled the eerily calm look in Shen Qingci's eyes yesterday, the cold, unyielding tone with which she had refused her help. A venomous fire mixed with jealousy, panic, and the sting of being slighted surged into her heart. This wretched girl, how dare she? How could she be worthy? In this godforsaken place she should have rotted away like a rat in a sewer. What right did she have to stir up such a commotion? This must be some evil sorcery. Li Dashan, the estate head, arrived a little later. He parted the crowd, walked to the edge of the plot, crouched down and carefully examined the seedlings, even pinching some soil and sniffing it. His face showed no expression, but his shrewd eyes churned with complex calculations. The soil was ordinary, even more barren than elsewhere. The well water in the estate was lifeless and could never nurture such growth. Then the answer could only lie with that newly arrived concubine's daughter, abandoned and sent here by the matriarch. Was it a secret technique of the Marquis's household? Or was this young lady herself? Somewhat uncanny. Li Dashan stood up, brushed the dirt from his hands, and gazed toward the little courtyard, lost in thought. The matriarch's intention, he could roughly guess, was for this young lady to quietly disappear here. But given the current situation, if this young lady truly had some special means to cultivate a way out of this dead land, her worth was entirely different. It was easy to offend a discarded concubine's daughter, but what if she actually had backing, or if she herself was that backing? In this world, someone who could bring tangible benefits was always more worth weighing than a mere abandoned pawn who only caused trouble. Just as the crowd was stirred with varied thoughts, the creaky wooden door of the little courtyard swung open with a groan. Shen Qingci stepped out. She had changed into a worn, faded old dress, her hair combed meticulously and loosely held in place by that old wooden hairpin. Her face was utterly pale, but there was neither panic nor pride. Only a calm like an ancient well. She walked step by step toward that vegetable patch that belonged to her, but now drew everyone's gaze her back straight as a slender bamboo that refused to bend even in a snowstorm. The crowd parted automatically for her. All kinds of eyes, reverent, curious, jealous, scrutinizing, fell upon her, but she seemed oblivious, walking straight to the edge of the plot, her gaze calmly sweeping over that uncanny emerald green. Young lady, Li Dashan spoke first, his tone deliberately even laced with probing. These vegetables. They're growing wonderfully. May I ask what method you used? So that the estate folk can learn and have a little more to eat. Shen Qingci turned to face Li Dashan. Her eyes were clear and cold with no warmth, yet strangely they made it hard for others to meet them. It was merely a stroke of luck, she said, her voice not loud but clearly reaching everyone. Back in the mansion I happened to come across an old book on farming, and remembered a folk remedy. Yesterday, seeing the seedlings in such a sorry state, I tried it as a last resort. I never expected it to actually work. An old book. A folk remedy. Li Dashan's eyes flickered. The explanation wasn't perfect, but at least it was plausible. A daughter of the Marquis's house reading some miscellaneous books was reasonable enough. But Zhao Momo couldn't hold back. She shrilled, "Old book? What old book could have such miraculous effects? Miss, you haven't used something you shouldn't have you? Although this estate is remote, it's still property of the Marquis's household. If you cause any trouble." "Nanny, you worry too much," Shen Qingci interrupted her gaze, suddenly turning to Zhao Momo. The chill in her eyes made the latter's words stick in her throat. "Since this is the Marquis's estate, as a daughter of the Marquis, what's wrong with trying a method to increase the estate's yield? Could it be that you think letting the estate lie barren and the tenants starve is proper and trouble-free?" Her tone was flat, her volume unchanged, but every word struck Zhao Momo's face like hailstones wrapped in ice. The phrase "daughter of the Marquis" was deliberately emphasized. Zhao Momo's face alternated between red and white. She wanted to retort, but when she met Shen Qingci's eyes that seemed to see through everything, a strange sense of guilt rose in her heart. She suddenly recalled the matriarch Wang's meaningful instructions before leaving the mansion: "Watch her closely. Don't let her die, but don't let her live too well either." The matriarch hadn't ordered her to be killed outright, nor had she said she couldn't be of any use. If this wretched girl truly had some skill, would suppressing her blindly actually spoil the matriarch's plans? Shen Qingci ignored her and turned back to Li Dashan, her tone softening slightly, but still carrying an unmistakable detachment. "Headman, this method is being used for the first time. The results are still uncertain. These seedlings need careful tending. Since I live here, I will take care of this plot myself to prevent others from messing things up through ignorance. As for whether the old book's method works on the other fields in the estate..." She paused, her gaze sweeping over the tenants who were watching her eagerly. "Let's wait until this batch of vegetables is harvested and see the results. After all, I'm not the only one the Marquis's household has sent to the estate to recuperate." The last sentence was said very softly, but it dropped like a pebble into Li Dashan's mind. Not the only one sent to recuperate. Who else? That's right, the master. Li Dashan's heart leaped. Yes, that must be it. How could a discarded concubine's daughter have such skills? There must be an expert by her side, or one secretly dispatched by the Marquis's household. That would explain everything. This concubine's daughter was just a front. The real talent was hidden in the shadows. The matriarch sending her here. Perhaps it wasn't entirely out of disfavor. Perhaps there was deeper meaning. In an instant, Li Dashan's mind filled with conjectures. The way he looked at Shen Qingci completely changed. A bit of contempt faded, replaced by cautious appraisal and even a trace of fawning. "Yes, Miss Right, you are right, you are." Li Dashan nodded repeatedly. "Since you've revived this land with your own hands, it should naturally be tended by you. If you need anything, just give the order. As for the rest..." He glanced at Zhao Momo's ugly expression and the tenants' eager eyes. "All of you disperse. Go about your business. Stop crowding around and disturbing the young lady's peace." Under Li Dashan shooing, the crowd reluctantly dispersed, but the looks cast at Shen Qingci were different now. Fear remained, but it was now mixed with new complex hopes. Shen Qingci stood there until the crowd had all left. Then she slowly crouched down, extended a finger, and gently touched a thick leaf. The cool sensation came through. She knew the crisis had passed for now. She had used the excuse of an old book and luck to conceal the secret of the spiritual spring used the Marquis's household, and a vague master, to temporarily intimidate Li Dashan and fend off Zhao Momo's harassment. This nearly uncanny emerald green was the first breach she had torn in the wall of despair. A talisman of protection. But it would also be a death warrant. It would draw more attention, both overt and covert, including that from the forest. She raised her eyes again toward the somber, silent forest. The morning mist had long since cleared. The afternoon sunlight gilded the dark green treetops with a pale gold, still revealing nothing inside. But Shen Qingci knew he had seen all of this. He had seen how she used this miracle, to instantly shift the situation in the isolated estate, gaining a breathing space and even planting seeds for future leverage. Her response was not just burying the seeds he had given her. It was also through this glaring green telling him, I am not a pawn to be manipulated. I have my own means, my own value, and the determination to disturb the board. You gave me a murky probe. I return it with a burgeoning vitality that shows its edge. So you who hold the pieces in the shadows, how will you place your next move? Will you find this piece more interesting and give it a little more attention? Or will you think it too sharp and prune it early lest it wound you? Shen Qingci slowly stood up and brushed the dust off her skirt, though there was none. The cold sharp curve on her lips had already vanished, leaving only utter calm. She turned and walked toward that dilapidated but temporarily hers little courtyard. Her back was straight, her steps steady. It was as if the silent storm that had just passed was nothing but a gentle breeze to her. Only her fingers slightly curled at her side betrayed a tension and anticipation known only to herself. She was waiting for his next move, waiting for the moment when those seeds buried deep in the soil would break through the ground. That might be the chance for cooperation, or perhaps the trumpet of confrontation. The icy chill at her fingertips had not yet faded when Shen Qingci pushed open the creaking courtyard gate. The small yard remained dilapidated with old clutter piled against the walls, the air thick with the musty scent of long abandonment. Yet her heart burned hotter than ever. A searing heat laced with blood, the fever of one who had wagered everything and now awaited judgment. She walked to the half-dead locust tree in the yard beneath which lay a patch of freshly turned soil darker than the ground around it, the very spot where she had buried that packet of seeds the night before. There was no sign of movement. The earth lay smooth, not even a hint of sprout. Shen Qingci crouched, her fingertips hovering above the soil without touching it. She merely watched, her gaze calm to the point of coldness. Was it not yet time? Or were those not seeds at all? Had the person in the mountain given her a hope or a deeper trap? She did not know. She only knew she had no way back. The miracle of the vegetable patch was both a talisman and a blade suspended over her head. Li Dashan had been momentarily cowed by the mention of Marquis's residence, and a master and Nanny Zhao had lost her composure at the dazzling green. But how long could this peace last? A day. 2. Once they discovered that aside from that patch of vegetables, she had no other support, that reverence born of the miracle would instantly transform into even more frantic greed and destructive desire. She needed more bargaining chips. And perhaps those chips lay beneath this very soil. Young miss. A timid voice came from behind. Shen Qingci did not turn around. She knew who it was. That little maid Chuanya was the only person assigned to serve her in this estate, but in truth she was also Li Dashan and Nanny Zhao's spy. These past few days Chuanya had been timorously avoiding her, her eyes filled with fear and unease. What is it? Shen Qingci's voice betrayed no emotion. Nanny Zhao asks if you miss would like anything for the evening meal. Chuanya's voice grew even lower, trembling almost imperceptibly. Shen Qingci rose slowly, brushing off non-existent dust from her hands, then turned around. Chuanya immediately lowered her head, afraid to meet her gaze. Anything, Shen Qingci said flatly. Whatever the estate has, that will do. Chuanya murmured. Nanny says you are weak, miss, and that the vegetables in the patch grow so well. They must have absorbed heaven and earth's essence and are most nourishing. She told me to pick the tenderest hearts to make a special broth for you alone. Here it comes. A cold smile flickered in Shen Qingci's eyes. Nanny Zhao could not restrain herself. That uncanny green had become a thorn she could not pull out, and also a pretext for probing. She wanted to taste the flavor of the miracle, and still more to see Shen Qingci's attitude toward it. No need, Shen Qingci said, still calm but with an authority that brooked no dissent. That vegetable patch must not be touched. Chuanya jerked her head up, her face drained of blood. But Nanny. Go back and tell her. Shen Qingci cut her off, fixing her gaze on Chuanya's pallid face, speaking each word with crystal clarity. That patch was saved by a fluke, following an obscure prescription from an ancient manual. The prescription states clearly the first harvest infused with the earth's medicinal qi is meant for anchoring the soul and fortifying the foundation. It must grow in full for 14 days. Not a single leaf may be picked during that time, or all effort is wasted and harm will follow instead. I now live here depending on the estate's charity. I dare not ruin a chance that might benefit everyone just for my own appetite. If Nanny does not believe me, she may search for herself, if she can find that long-lost ancient book. Her words were half-truth, half-fabrication, laced with the mystifying phrases anchoring the soul and harm will follow, and she neatly draped over it the great banner of benefiting everyone. Chuanya listened, utterly bewildered, feeling that the young Mrs. tone, though mild, pressed down on her so heavily she could barely breathe. More terrifying than the roar of village head Li Dashan. This servant will go report to Nanny at once. Chuanya hastily made a bow and fled as if Shen Qingci watched her retreating back without a flicker of emotion. She knew these words would not intimidate Nanny Zhao for long. Greed and jealousy would soon overwhelm that faint fear of the unknown. But all she needed was this window of time. Night gradually enshrouded the small yard. Shen Qingci lit no lamp, she sat on the cold brick edge of the Kong, illuminated only by the thin light seeping through the window. The evening meal was a bowl of watery congee that reflected her face and a small dish of dark salty pickles. She ate quietly, then washed the bowl and chopsticks and put them away. The entire estate seemed to have sunk into slumber save for the occasional bark of a dog in the distance. But she knew some people were still awake. For instance, in the neighboring yard, Nanny Zhao's bed, where she tossed and turned muttering curses. And in the village head Li Dashan's room, the abacus beads clacked, fell silent, then clacked again. And deeper still, in the mountain forest, the eyes that might be watching this dilapidated little yard through the boundless darkness. Time trickled away cold and viscous. Shen Qingci closed her eyes, forcing herself to rest. The use of the spiritual spring was profoundly draining, and she needed to conserve her strength. Yet her consciousness remained alarmingly clear, every nerve taut, as she listened to every faint stir in the darkness. An indeterminate time passed. Rustle. The sound was exceedingly faint, almost masked by the wind whispering through the leaves. But Shen Qingci heard it. That was not the wind. She snapped her eyes open, her gaze sharp as a cold star in the dark. She did not move, nor did she alter the rhythm of her breathing, yet every muscle in her body tensed to its limit in that instant. The sound came from outside the window. From beneath that old locust tree. Rustle. Crack. Another sound clearer than before, like the faint friction of something breaking through a hard shell. Shen Qingci's heart thumped heavily in the dead silence of her chest. She rose from the Kong with extreme slowness and lightness, her bare feet touching the cold floor without a whisper. Then step by step she crept to the window. The window paper was worn and yellowed, casting the blurred moonlight outside. She turned her body slightly, casting her gaze toward the shadow beneath the tree in the yard. The moonlight grudgingly spilled a sliver of pale radiance, falling precisely upon the freshly turned soil. Then Shen Qingci saw it. A minuscule, barely perceptible point of faint green light emerging from the crevices of the earth with extreme difficulty, yet with unwavering tenacity. It was no sprout. The light was too small, too feeble, flickering in the darkness as if it might extinguish at any moment. But it was undeniably there. And under her watch that trace of green light stretched upward ever so slowly, forking into a finer, almost translucent thread of luminous tendrils, swaying gently as if testing this cold and perilous world. It was not a seed. Shen Qingci held her breath. What was that? What was it that the person in the mountain forest had given her? The green light flickered again as if sensing her gaze. The luminous tendril shifted its angle by an infinitesimal degree, turning toward the window. At that very moment. Whoosh! A piercing sound of something cleaving through the air tore through the stillness of the night. It was not aimed at her. It was aimed at that faint green light in the yard. Shen Qingci's pupils contracted. Without a moment's thought, her body reacted before her mind. She flung herself backward, her back slamming against the cold earthen wall as a muffled thud echoed. Thunk! A short pitch-black crossbow bolt, utterly devoid of reflection, struck precisely into the window lattice at the spot where she had stood just moments before. The bolt's tail quivered faintly. The point where the bolt had embedded itself was less than half a foot from the green light. It was a warning. And an answer. The player of the pieces in the shadows had delivered his response with unmistakable clarity. I see your edge. I also see the secret you have hidden. The chess piece is intriguing but far too restless. This arrow is the shears that trim the branches. Next time it may be the blade that strikes the heart of the piece. In the yard the faint green light swayed violently in the wind stirred by the bolt, then abruptly vanished. As if it had never existed. The darkness swallowed everything once more. Only the black crossbow bolt deeply embedded in the window lattice gleamed with a cold deadly sheen in the thin moonlight, pointing silently toward the room. Toward the girl who, with her back pressed against the earthen wall, shivering cold, slowly curled her lips into a smile. Shen Qingci raised her hand, her fingertips brushing lightly across her icy cheek. Then, facing the infinite darkness beyond the window, she whispered in a breath only she could hear, so. They think him too sharp after all. Then let's see who wins. Your arrow's speed. Or my bones hardened by crawling back from hell. The earthen wall beneath her fingertips was rough and bitingly cold, the chill creeping up her spine, yet it could not quell the fire kindling ever fiercer within her chest. Shen Qingci remained motionless, her back pressed against the wall. The moonlight was stingy, barely enough to outline the blurred silhouette of a black crossbow bolt lodged in the window lattice. The fletching had long ceased to tremble, solidifying into a silent threat. The air still carried the sharp aftermath of the whistling trajectory, and, a faint almost imperceptible mixture of saltpeter and iron. That was no ordinary arrow. It was a military crossbow bolt. Only the elite troops or certain shadowy factions would use such a killing tool, crafted with a special quenching process that rendered it nearly non-reflective. The archer had precisely controlled the angle and force driving the bolt into the window lattice merely half a foot from that faint green glow, and only a slight twist of the wrist away from her brow. It was a warning and more so a demonstration. A display of his dominating control from above, his penetrating observation and his interest in that little secret of hers. Shen Qingci slowly exhaled a turbid breath which condensed into a small puff of white mist in the frigid air before quickly dissipating. She looked down, her gaze falling upon her own open palm. Her fingertips, which had touched those mutated vegetable leaves during the day, still seemed to retain a subtle cool sensation of vitality. That was no illusion. The seeds he had given her. When buried they sprouted not plants but light. Something she could not comprehend yet, that the figure in the shadows evidently regarded as a secret or even a threat. So he made his move. With a single bolt he drew a line and redefined the rules of the game. A chess piece could be interesting, but it must not slip out of control. The blade's edge could be revealed, but it must not wound the hand that holds it. He thinks I am too sharp, she repeated silently, the icy curve of her lips deepening, yet there was no trace of amusement in her eyes, only a calm, almost brutal clarity. Good. If he feared her sharpness, it meant she indeed possessed the potential to become a blade. And when a blade grows too keen, one who cannot wield it instinctively seeks to destroy it or break it, dull it, turning it into a safe, obedient, blunt tool. Which would he choose? Shen Qingci did not know. But she understood that from the moment that bolt embedded itself in the window lattice, the thin tentative veil of mutual observation between her and the man in the mountain forest had been utterly torn apart. The probing phase was over. The game had officially begun. And her chips were pitifully few. A mysterious golden finger of dubious origin, a memory of rebirth that was prophetic yet momentarily useless, and a skeleton honed exceptionally hard from crawling back from the abyss. She gently rolled her neck, which had grown stiff from tension, and finally left the wall she had been leaning against. Her steps were featherlight, soundless, moving toward the window like a cat. She did not immediately pull out the bolt. First she completely concealed herself in the shadows beside the window, listening intently. The night wind whistled through the cracks in the dilapidated courtyard wall, producing a low moan. A distant unknown night bird gave a short cry. Of farther away, a dog kept by some farmstead was startled into barking twice before quickly falling silent. Everything sounded as usual. The arrival of that bolt had been like a phantom, leaving no trace. Only then did Shen Qingci reach out, her fingertips touching the shaft. The cold metallic texture damp with night dew. She exerted some force and pulled out the crossbow bolt, which was deeply embedded in the wood. A soft tsk sound remarkably clear in the stillness. The shaft was pitch black, heavy in her hand. The arrowhead was not the usual flat triangle, but a tri-pronged pyramid with blood grooves. Craftsmanship so exquisite it was chilling. No markings, no ornamentation. It was as clean as its origin, hidden in darkness. She toyed with this lethal warning, yet her gaze drifted to the window toward the darkness beneath the old locust tree. The emerald glow had vanished as if utterly scattered by that arrow. But she knew that once something broke through the soil, it never truly disappeared. It merely hid deeper, awaiting the next moment to emerge from its cocoon. A pair of shears for trimming branches. She murmured, her fingertips tracing the cold arrowhead. That depends. Whether what you aim to trim is a tender vine or a thorny bramble. She turned away, no longer gazing at the impenetrable darkness beyond the window. The danger had not dissipated ere it had merely transformed from a vague shadow into a tangible arrow. Yet strangely, the frozen lake within her heart was not seized by fear. Instead it stirred with a tremor that bordered on exhilaration. It was a long-forgotten sensation. The subtle quickening of blood when facing a formidable adversary. No longer the silk-wrapped needles of the Marquis' rear courtyard, nor the blatant greed of people like Zhao Mamo. This was a true arena, one reeking of blood. And she, an exiled, seemingly destitute concubine's daughter, had been so solemnly warned by such an opponent in such a manner. What an honor! Shen Qingci walked to the only worn wooden table inside the hut, gently placed the crossbow bolt upon it, and blew out the bean's-eyed oil lamp. Utter darkness descended, swallowing the hut's outline, and the last hint of expression on her face. Only her eyes in that absolute blackness gleamed even brighter than the sparse stars outside the window. She needed to reassess. Assess that man's purpose. Was giving her the seed a test or a genuine offer of alliance? Was this arrow severing the possibility of cooperation or another form of qualification examination? Assess her own predicament. Zhao Mamo and Li Dashan were troubles in plain sight, while the man in the mountains was a suspended sword in the dark. Open attacks are easy to dodge, but hidden arrows are hard to guard against. Yet sometimes the most perilous hidden arrow can also become the light that shatters a deadlock. She needed leverage, more leverage. Relying solely on that erratic, spurring ability was insufficient. She needed to gain a foothold in the manner quickly, money, people, and information. The wind beyond the window seemed to pick up, rattling the tattered window paper. Shen Qingci sat silently in the darkness, her spine straight as a solitary pine rooted in a cliff crevice. Her fingertips unconsciously traced patterns on the rough tabletop, sketching lines that no one else could comprehend. The cold crossbow bolt lay beside her hand like a silent boundary marker, separating the 16 years of muddled, scraping existence behind her from the path ahead, one destined to be overgrown with thorns and stained with blood. After an unknowable stretch of time, when the eastern sky barely began to show a faint grayish-white, she finally moved. Not to rest, but to walk to the corner, pick up the old hoe left by Chen Qingci during the day and weigh its heft. Then she pushed open the creaking broken wooden door, and stepped into the deepest darkness before dawn. In the courtyard beneath the old locust tree, the soil still held the moisture of night dew. Shen Qingci raised the hoe. Without a moment's hesitation, she dug forcefully into the spot where the emerald glow had burst from the earth the night before. Since the secret had already been seen, since she had already been warned against being restless, what meaning was there in hiding and disguising? Better to let it grow faster, more conspicuous. Fast enough that there would be no time to trim. Conspicuous enough that even the one moving the pieces would be forced to acknowledge the uncontrollable power brewing within this chess piece. The first ray of dawn struggled through the clouds, falling upon the girl's profile smeared with fresh soil, cold and resolute. She lowered her gaze, looking into the deep moist earth freshly turned by the hoe, where an emerald glow denser and clearer than the previous night silently coalesced like the eyes of a demon slowly opening from the dark abyss. That faint emerald glow deep within the damp soil pulsed like a slow-beating heart. Shen Qingci knelt on the icy mud, her fingertips suspended above the radiance, sensing a peculiar faint suction. It was not she who was driving it, but it that was actively drawing something. Her body heat, or perhaps that barely perceptible trace of vitality flowing between heaven and earth at this break of dawn. She closed her eyes, cast aside all distractions, and sank her entire consciousness into that darkness. It was not about commanding it to grow, but about feeling it, as if sensing another heart of her own, one that had long been silent and had just begun to stir. Hum! A subtle tremor emanated from the depths of the earth. The emerald glow suddenly brightened, not in an explosive burst, but with a steady, irrefutable speed, spreading outward and seeping through. It was no longer merely a point of light, it transformed into countless fine luminous veins, silently extending along the cracks in the soil and the gnarled roots of the old locust tree. A fine sheen of sweat broke out on Shen Qingci's forehead, not from exhaustion but from a near-absolute strain of concentration. She could see that wherever those luminous veins passed, the dormant, nearly withered grass seeds in the soil struggled to sprout trembling, fragile shoots. The bark of the old locust tree near the ground in its cracked crevices seemed to exude a faint, almost imperceptible moisture that belonged to spring. The scope was small, confined only to the patch of earth within reach of the old locust's roots. But the effect was already startling. This was not forcing a specific plant to grow. It was within a limited range, forcibly altering the vitality state of a patch of land. Though faint to the point of being negligible, the direction was horrifying. She abruptly withdrew her hand to her fingertips were icy cold, yet her chest burned hot. This ability was far more uncontrollable than she had imagined and far more dangerous. No wonder that crossbow bolt had come. In the face of absolute power, any anomaly was a threat to be assessed, even eliminated. A soft self-mocking laugh escaped her lips. Afraid. Of course she was. The owner of those eyes in the shadows could aim a crossbow bolt with precision at her window frame, and could just as precisely pierce her throat. But more than fear, there was a calmness born of desperation, a near-arrogant lucidity. Since there was no escape, she would face it head in. She needed those eyes to see that she was not merely an anomaly but a valuable anomaly. A blade too sharp, one that might wound its wielder, might be broken early, but a blade sharp enough to hack through thorns and sever shackles. The one who held it might hesitate, risk being cut by grasping it, or let it fall into another's hands turned against him. The morning light finally tore through the night's curtain and the day broke fully. Shen Qingci stood up, brushing the dirt from her hands and the hem of her skirt. The emerald glow on the upturned soil had quietly faded, as if it had never existed. Only by leaning close and looking carefully could one notice that the patch of soil was unusually dark brown and moist, and a few tender blades of grass which should not have sprouted at this season or in this spot timidly poked their heads out. She turned and went back into the house, leaning the old hoe against the wall. Then, picking up the cold crossbow bolt, she meticulously wiped off any night dew and dust that might have clung to it with a coarse cloth. The shaft was neither iron nor wood, it had a dark light-absorbing texture. The fletching was trimmed with neat precision, exuding a cold utilitarian beauty. The arrowhead gleamed with a frigid light, and the side blade had delicate blood grooves for bleeding. This was not a standard military crossbow bolt. It was privately made, the work of a master craftsman. She placed the bolt on the table side by side with the withered twig. The twig represented a seed, a possible invitation to cooperation shrouded in mystery. The crossbow bolt represented a warning, a boundary, a threat of death that could come at any moment. The two placed together were contradictory yet unified. Like the man himself. Mysterious, powerful, fraught with unpredictable danger, yet the only variable she could currently reach that might break the deadlock. Heavy footsteps and undisguised complaints came from outside the door. What kind of godforsaken place is this? Freezing to death all night. The stove is cold, not even a cup of hot water. It was Mama Zhao's shrill voice, laced with the hoarseness of a hangover and deep dissatisfaction. Does she really think she's a pampered lady here to enjoy herself? Then came Li Dashan's smooth-tongued appeasement. Madam, please calm down. We've just arrived after all. Everything's lacking and we'll get things gradually. Miss Qingci is frail and probably hasn't risen yet. Frail? Mama Zhao sneered, her voice suddenly rising, clearly meant for those inside to hear. I think she's putting on airs. What hour is this? The young ladies in the Marquis' residence would have already risen to pay respects to the matriarch. Does she really think being sent here means she's still a young mistress? Pa! Shen Qingci listened quietly, her face devoid of expression. She walked to the water vat, ladled half a gourd of icy well water, and slowly washed herself. The well water was bone-chilling, sending a shiver through her skin, yet it sharpened her mind. While combing her hair, she picked up the old wooden hairpin left by her birth mother. The hairpin was simple, even somewhat worn, but polished, smooth and warm. It was the only trace that woman had left in the world besides her daughter. Her fingertips traced the simple pattern on the pin's head, stirring a faint, almost imperceptible ripple in the frozen lake of her heart, which was then covered by a deeper chill. She fixed the hairpin firmly in her hair, then pushed open the door. The morning light flooded in somewhat. In the courtyard, Mama Zhao stood with her hands on her hips, pointing at the flustered Li Dashan, who was followed by two dark-skinned farmhands peeking curiously, likely the estate's laborers. Chen Shi too was also nearby, silently chopping firewood. Hearing the door open, he looked up briefly, then quickly lowered his head, though his chopping slowed. All eyes instantly fixed on the young woman standing under the porch. She wore a simple half-worn dress of plain fabric, washed nearly white yet meticulously neat. Her hair was lightly coiled with a single wooden hairpin, a few stray strands brushing her cheeks. Her face bore no powder or rouge, her complexion a pallor born of prolonged sunlessness, yet her brows and eyes were distinct, her nose bridged straight and her lips a faint hue. What was most impossible to ignore were her eyes. Calm, profound, like two ancient wells untouched by ripples, clearly reflecting the greedy, scrutinizing or curious faces of everyone in the courtyard, yet devoid of any timidity or fear befitting her age or circumstances. Old Madame Zhao felt an inexplicable stifle under that gaze, then a surge of greater fury. A demoted concubine's daughter dared to look at people with such eyes. Miss, you're finally up. Old Madame Zhao drawled, her smile insincere. This estate isn't the Marquis' manor, or rules are lax, but one can't lie in bed until the sun is high. From now on, Miss must learn to lend a hand with the chores inside and outside the courtyard. After all, we're short on hands and silver. These cruel words directly positioned Shen Qingci as a laborer needing to work. Li Dashan rubbed his hands, a smile plastered on his face, yet his eyes shrewdly appraised Shen Qingci, as if assessing how much oil could still be squeezed from this fallen young lady, or whether she might become a nuisance. Shen Qingci's gaze slowly swept over the crowd, finally resting on old Madame Zhao's face etched with provocation. She spoke, her voice not loud but piercing the cool morning air with a strange, unquestionable calm. What Madame said, since I've come to the estate, I must naturally abide by its rules. Old Madame Zhao was taken aback, not expecting such compliance, and was about to gloat when Shen Qingci continued, but I wonder, did Mother send you here to care for me or to manage all the estate's expenses and supplies? She paused, turning her gaze to Li Dashan, estate head. Li, I'm new here and unfamiliar with many things. According to the manor's old rules, for a stewardess sent to the estate, her monthly allowance and daily provisions, are they drawn from the manor's public accounts or additionally taken from the estate's output? Li Dashan's smile stiffened. Old Madame Zhao's face instantly changed. Wang had sent old Madame Zhao ostensibly to care for, but actually to monitor and torment Shen Qingci, and to skim off what little she had. This was an unspoken understanding but could never be brought into the open. Especially the words additionally taken, which directly jabbed at possible collusion and embezzlement between old Madame Zhao and Li Dashan. Miss, your words. Li Dashan gave a dry laugh. Old Madame Zhao is a trusted aide by Madame's side, naturally supported by the manor. Our estate is poor, we can't afford it. Oh. Shen Qingci nodded slightly, her gaze still sharply fixed on old Madame Zhao. So Madame's allowance is still paid by the manor. In that case, when Madame said silver is tight, does she mean the estate is tight, or does Madame think I still have some silver or items that she could tighten for me? You. Old Madame Zhao's face turned purple with rage, pointing at Shen Qingci, her fingers trembling. I kindly advise you, and you bite back. Truly an ill-bred one. Madame exaggerates, Shen Qingci replied, her tone still flat. She even stepped forward lightly, the morning light elongating her slender shadow, inexplicably imposing a silent pressure. Qingci is merely puzzled. Since Madame's provisions are not a worry and the estate's expenses have fixed rules, where does the tightness come from? Could it be that Mother instructed to reduce my allowance? If so, please show me Mother's handwritten note or tally so Qingci can comply and later return to the manor with evidence, lest Mother blame me for not knowing frugality. Produce Wang's handwritten note. How could Wang leave such clear evidence of mistreating a concubine's daughter? Old Madame Zhao was completely choked, her face turning livid, her chest heaving violently, yet she couldn't utter a single rebuttal. Li Dashan's eyes flickered as he reassessed the pale, frail girl before him. Sharp-tongued, logical, and invoking the Marquis's wife. It seemed she wasn't someone to be easily manipulated. At least not openly. Chen Shidu's woodchopping had unknowingly stopped. He secretly looked up at the girl on the porch, her back straight, easily suppressing old Madame Zhao's arrogance alone. A faint, almost reverent ripple crossed his dark face. Shen Qingci took in everyone's reactions, knowing her initial intimidation had achieved its goal. She knew when to stop, her tone softening slightly yet still maintaining a distant framework. The estate has its difficulties. Qingci understands. From now on I will manage my own meals and daily life without troubling Madame for extra care. But this courtyard is dilapidated and needs repairs, and daily necessities are lacking. I ask Estate Headley to help arrange what he can. I will not make things difficult for you regarding the accounts. Combining soft and hard tactics, she drew clear boundaries, blocking old Madame Zhao's path to exploiting her under the guise of care, while giving Li Dashan a way out, hinting that as long as he followed the rules she wouldn't cause trouble. Li Dashan quickly nodded. Miss, rest assured. I will arrange what needs to be done as soon as possible. His attitude was noticeably more respectful than before. Old Madame Zhao shot Shen Qingci a venomous glare, her eyes filled with malice, but she dared not confront her publicly. She snorted coldly and swiveled away, likely plotting some underhanded scheme. This morning's minor confrontation seemed ordinary but seethed with undercurrents. Shen Qingci retreated into the room, closed the door, and leaned against the cold wooden panel, letting out a soft breath. Her fingertips trembled slightly, not from fear but from the subtle exhaustion after being tautly stretched. She knew this was only the beginning. Old Madame Zhao wouldn't give up, and Li Dashan was still watching. And in the shadows, her gaze drifted outside the window, past the crumbling walls toward the mist-shrouded silent forest in the distance. Were those eyes brighter than stars, now watching this morning's farce through some means? Did he see her sharp tongue or her struggle to carve a foothold in this desperate situation? The chess piece had begun to move on its own. Was the player amused? Or did he feel it needed trimming? Shen Qingci walked to the table and picked up the black crossbow bolt again. The cold touch spread through her fingertips. She suddenly wondered, when this blade was not only sharp, but also tried to choose its own direction, how would the hand that moved it place the next piece? Would it continue to warn? Or would it be unable to resist coming personally to weigh the true measure of this blade? The crossbow bolt beneath her fingertips was chillingly cold, reminiscent of the temperature of those eyes in the mountain forest last night. Shen Qingci gently placed it on the table, producing a soft tap. Outside the window, the morning mist was being torn apart by the rising sun, strand by strand, as the mountain forest gradually sharpened into focus. The silence was so profound that it seemed the arrow that had whistled through the air last night a warning was merely a figment of her imagination. But she knew it was not. That arrow was a tangible threat, and also a signal. A signal that she had been placed upon some kind of chessboard. A chess piece. She curled the corner of her mouth, revealing a faint, almost self-deprecating arc. Well then, let's see if this chess piece can grow thorns sharp enough to pierce the hand that moves it. Creak. The sound of the battered courtyard gate being pushed open interrupted her thoughts, carrying a deliberate impatience. It was not Li Dashan. The footsteps were unsteady and dragging. It was old Madame Zhao. Shen Qingci did not immediately move. She simply listened quietly, listening as the footsteps stopped in the yard, accompanied by a scrutinizing gaze. And then a deliberately sharp, complaining voice pierced through the thin window paper. What time is this? The sun is already high in the sky. Does she truly think she's a pampered mistress here, waiting for someone to serve her washing and breakfast? Here it comes. The morning harassment, late but not absent. Shen Qingci lowered her eyelashes, concealing the cold gleam that flashed in her eyes. She walked to the basin and, using the leftover cold water from the night before, carefully washed her face. The water was very cold, causing her skin to tighten slightly, yet it also instantly cleared her chaotic thoughts. She dried her face and hands with an old cloth towel, and in front of the blurry bronze mirror she secured the single plain wooden hairpin firmly in her hair. The person in the mirror had a pale complexion, traces of exhaustion from a long journey and mental strain on her features. Only her eyes were calm and profound, like a lake covered with a thin layer of ice beneath which turbulent currents surged. She pushed open the door. The morning light flooded in, somewhat dazzling. In the yard, old Madame Zhao stood with her hands on her hips, pointing and gesturing toward the empty kitchen. Li Dashan stood by with his hands down his face, wearing his usual oily smile, but his eyes sharply swept over her the moment she appeared. A few farmhands, peeking and craning their necks, pretended to be busy under the eaves or beside the woodpile, but were actually eavesdropping. All gazes, greedy, calculating, curious, contemptuous, converged upon her. Shen Qingci stood straight-backed in her plain clothes under the dilapidated porch like a green bamboo that had been battered by wind and rain, yet still strove to grow toward the faint light. "Good morning, old Madame Zhao," she said. Her voice was not loud but clear and steady, carrying a natural aloofness that instantly subdued the noise old Madame Zhao had deliberately created. Old Madame Zhao was choked by her calm demeanor. The string of harsh words she had prepared stuck in her throat, neither up nor down, making her face even uglier. She snorted, her triangular eyes scanning Shen Qingci up and down. "Well, miss, you certainly rose early. This estate is nothing like the Marquis mansion. There are no idle servants to wait on you. Breakfast time has passed and there's no fire left on the stove." This was a blatant reduction of provisions with not even a pretense of courtesy. Shen Qingci's gaze passed over old Madame Zhao and landed on Li Dashan's face. "Estate manager Li, is it the estate's rule that once the hour of the dragon has passed the servants are not to be fed?" Li Dashan, not expecting her to address him directly, was startled for a moment before forcing a smile. "That's not it. It's just, today has been chaotic. The kitchen woman might have been negligent." "Negligent?" Shen Qingci repeated the word softly, then turned her gaze back to old Madame Zhao. "Mother sent you here with me to attend to my daily needs. If the estate's rules are indeed like this, you should have informed me in advance or made arrangements yourself, rather than only telling me after I came out that there is none. Or perhaps..." She paused, her voice even slower, yet each word clear and striking everyone's heart. "Is the attending you understand different from what mother instructed? Or perhaps, old Madame Zhao, you think you can reduce my provisions on behalf of mother?" Old Madame Zhao's face changed drastically. "Nonsense. How dare I act on behalf of the mistress?" "Then so be it," Shen Qingci interrupted, giving her no chance to catch her breath. "Since mother has not issued any explicit order to reduce according to the old rules of the household, even if I am resting at the estate, there are distinctions between the legitimate and the illegitimate, and allowances differ, but daily meals and living are governed by fixed regulations. You are an old servant by mother's side and should know this better than I." She invoked the old rules of the household, invoked her mother, each word like a blade striking at the core. Old Madame Zhao's actions at the very least were negligence, at worst they were embezzlement under the guise of the mistress' authority. And what was embezzled might not all go into old Madame Zhao's own pocket. Was estate manager Li Dashan also involved? Li Dashan's smile stiffened and his eyes flickered. Shen Qingci knew when to stop. Her tone softened slightly, yet still carried an unassailable framework. "I understand that the manor has its difficulties. From now on I will handle my own meals and daily needs without troubling you, nurse, for extra care." This statement completely sealed the path for Zhao Mama to control and embezzle under the guise of care. "But this courtyard is dilapidated and needs repairs, and daily supplies are lacking. I would ask Manager Li to kindly help arrange them." She turned to Li Dashan, offering a way out. "I will ensure the accounts are properly handled so as not to trouble the manager." A blend of soft and hard tactics. She had drawn clear boundaries and established rules, yet implied that as long as things were done properly she would not cause trouble. A flicker of calculation passed through Li Dashan's eyes. Soon his oily smile returned, his manner even more deferential than before. "Rest assured, miss. I will arrange everything as quickly as possible. The matter of breakfast was my oversight. I will have a fresh meal prepared for you immediately." Zhao Mama seethed with rage, her chest heaving as she glared at Shen Qingci with a venomous look like needles dipped in poison. She had never expected this pale, frail-looking concubine's daughter to be so sharp-tongued, every word reasoned, invoking the mistress of the Marquis household and past precedents, shattering all her schemes at once. With Li Dashan's attitude clearly shifting, she knew continuing the quarrel would gain her nothing. "Humph." Finally she squeezed out a cold snort, twisted her bulky frame, and stormed off, her figure radiating resentment and scheming. This morning's confrontation seemed uneventful, but was fraught with undercurrents. Shen Qingci, standing alone, had momentarily suppressed the insolent servants and established an initial impression of someone not to be trifled with among the manor's laborers. The farmhands whispered and dispersed. Shen Qingci had unknowingly stopped splitting firewood. He glanced up furtively at the slender girl standing in the doorway with a straight back and calm face, and a faint, almost respectful ripple crossed his dark features. Shen Qingci took in the reactions of all, knowing her initial deterrent had achieved its purpose. She said no more, gave a slight nod to Li Dashan, and turned back into the house. Closing the door, she leaned against the cold rough wood, shutting out all gazes from outside before allowing herself a quiet exhale. Her always straight shoulders relaxed imperceptibly, the fingers hanging by her side curled almost invisibly, a faint tremor in her fingertips. It was not fear. It was the subtle weakness after having exerted every ounce of mental effort and calculation, then suddenly letting go. Like a bowstring stretched too taut, springing back gently. She knew this was only the beginning. Zhao Mama would not give up, and Li Dashan was still watching. And in the shadows, her gaze involuntarily drifted beyond the window over the dilapidated courtyard wall toward the distant forest. Now that the mist had cleared, it seemed even more profound and silent. Sunlight could not penetrate that dense green. Had those eyes, brighter than stars yet colder than ice, also been watching this morning's farce through some unseen means? Had he seen her sharp tongue and calculated steps against the insolent servants, or the invisible fragile tremor after she turned back into the house witnessed by none? The chess piece had begun to move on its own. Was the player surprised, intrigued? Or did he find this piece too active and in need of trimming? Shen Qingci walked back to the table and picked up the black crossbow bolt again. The cold sensation spread through her fingertips, carrying the chill of the deep forest and a silent scrutiny. She slowly rubbed the sharp arrowhead with her thumb. A slight sting came through. Suddenly she wondered, when this blade, forced onto the chessboard, not only tried to remain sharp but began to choose its own direction, even vaguely wishing to glimpse the face of the player. What move would that hand, accustomed to control and ruthless in its placements, make next? A harsher warning? A colder disregard? Or would it finally be unable to resist appearing in person to gauge the true weight of this blade that seemed to be subtly threatening rebellion? Danger crept around her like vines. Yet after burning her bridges, a strangely cool recklessness grew. Since she could not escape the game, she would make herself a blade so valuable that the player would hesitate, even be forced to take her seriously. Outside the window, her morning had only just begun. And deep in the forest, behind a rock shaded by trees, a tall figure that seemed to merge with the shadows slowly withdrew his distant gaze. He toyed with a smooth black chess piece between his fingers, his eyes deep and dark, reflecting no light of the sky. Though the brief confrontation in the manor had been too far away to hear clearly, he had seen it all: the girl's straight back, her composed demeanor under siege, and the moment before she retreated indoors when she lifted her eyes toward the forest. Interesting. Much more resilient than expected. And much more intelligent. He moved his fingertip, and the black chess piece gently fell onto the rough rock surface with a soft click. As if in answer to the faint sound of the crossbow bolt placed on the girl's table, the game had indeed become more intriguing. The morning light filtered through the window lattice, falling upon the black crossbow bolt on the table, coating the cold metal with a pale golden edge that could not warm it in the slightest. The stinging sensation at Shen Qingci's fingertips had faded, leaving only a faint, barely visible red mark. She placed the bolt back on the table with a gentle motion, yet bearing a solemnity that bordered on ritualistic. She knew that from the moment she picked up this bolt, attempting to decipher its hidden meaning, she was no longer merely a passive pawn awaiting its fate. She was probing, provoking. Even if the challenge was silent, existing only within the shifting currents of her own mind. From outside the door came deliberately softened footsteps, halting at the threshold with hesitation. Shen Qingci did not move, her gaze remained fixed on the crossbow bolt. Miss. It was Chun Tao's voice, faint as a mosquito's hum, trembling with lingering terror. Breakfast has been brought. Not withheld but brought. A faint icy curve traced Shen Qingci's lips. A coldness devoid of warmth. It seemed the confrontation outside the door earlier had finally yielded some effect. At the very least, it had made certain people temporarily retract their overly blatant claws. Come in, she said, her voice calm and unruffled. Chun Tao pushed the door open, carrying a coarse wooden tray. On it sat a bowl of millet porridge so thin it could reflect one's face, a dish of dark indistinct pickled vegetables, and a dull-colored mixed-grain steamed bun. The fare was pitifully meager, yet compared to the half-bowl of spoiled porridge that Zhao Momo had threatened to reduce her to according to the rules, it was a privilege. Chun Tao set the tray on the table, her eyes darting briefly toward the conspicuous black crossbow bolt before flinching back as if burned, her head drooping lower. Miss, please eat. Li Zhuangtou just said that from now on your meals will be brought on time. Li Zhuangtou. Shen Qingci picked up the hard bun, feeling its rough texture under her fingertips. He is a sensible man. Chun Tao dared not respond, standing there awkwardly. Shen Qingci broke off a small piece of the bun, placed it in her mouth and chewed slowly. The coarse bran scraped against her throat, carrying the stale, musty taste of old grain. She ate slowly but steadily, as if savoring a delicacy rather than this unpalatable coarse fare. Each mouthful was a reminder of her current plight, of those who looked down upon her as if she were a weed. A reminder too that she must seize something, and quickly. Is there a hillside near the estate where medicinal herbs can be gathered? Or does anyone grow any special vegetables? Shen Qingci asked suddenly after swallowing the last piece of bun, and picking up the bowl of watery porridge. Chun Tao was taken aback, never expecting this fallen young lady, who had just dared to confront Zhao Momo, to ask such a thing. There is a hillside, the back hill, but the path is rough and I've heard there are wild beasts. Medicinal herbs. This servant knows nothing of them. As for vegetables, each family grows the usual ones, radishes, cabbages and such. Chan Shida's family tried planting something else once, but it failed and his mother scolded him for wasting the land. Chan Shi too. Shen Qingci committed the name to memory. That honest farmer who worried about medicine money for his mother. Is his mother very ill? It's a chronic condition. Coughing, shortness of breath, unable to do heavy work. Most of the little money brother Shi Tu earns goes to medicine, but it doesn't improve. Chun Tao spoke with sympathy, then realized she had said too much and quickly fell silent. I see. Shen Qingci finished the last of the porridge, the bottom of the bowl as clean as if it had been washed. Who is in charge of purchasing daily supplies for the estate? Things like seeds and tools. Li Zhuangtou oversees it, but the actual errands are run by Qian Laoli, a distant relative of Li Zhuangtais. Chun Tao answered cautiously. The network was small yet tangled and intricate. Li Dashan was the local strongman. Qian Laoli, his henchman Zhao Momo, was the imperial envoy from the Marquis' household, seemingly above Li Dashan, but a powerful dragon could not crush a local snake. There must be friction between them. And ordinary tenant farmers like Chan Shi too were the bottom rung, the most vulnerable, and also a possible lever to pry open the situation. Shen Qingci's mind raced with calculations. Her golden finger, the knowledge of crop improvement and basic medical skills, required a test field and an opportunity to demonstrate its value to earn a foothold and initial trust. Chan Shida's family plight might be just the entry point, but the prerequisite was that she must have the chance to step out of this courtyard and interact with these people. And at present the greatest obstacle aside from Zhao Momo was. Her gaze once again drifted seemingly nonchalantly toward the window, toward that deep, silent, forested mountain. That mysterious player of the game. Would he allow this blade to attempt so soon to touch the other pieces on deep in the mountain forest inside a cave? The light was dim, with only a small campfire flickering, casting its glow on the tall, straight figure seated beside it. Xiao Heng held a slender branch poking at the fire, causing sparks to crackle softly. His face was expressionless, his profile stark and cold in the shifting light and shadow. After firing that warning crossbow bolt the night before, he had deliberately stopped paying close attention to the commotion at the neighboring estate. A disowned concubine's daughter, a petty quarrel among servants, hardly worth his consideration. Until dawn, when the young woman stood straight-backed under the porch facing down a crowd, her words clear and precise, forcing the insolent servant into a corner. That composure, that audacity to attempt controlling the rhythm, even from a position of absolute disadvantage, and even that sharp awareness, stealing a glance toward the mountain forest before retreating into the house. All compelled him to turn his attention back to her. Master! A shadowy figure appeared silently at the mouth of the cave, bowing in report. It's confirmed. She is indeed the third concubine-born daughter of the Yongchang Marquis household named Shen Qingci. Her mother died early and she is neglected. She was sent here under the pretext of recuperating by her legitimate mother Wang Shi. The accompanying Zhao Momo is Wang Shi's trusted confidant, skilled in bullying the weak and deceiving the strong. Xiao Heng continued poking the fire without pause. The Yongchang Marquis household. He repeated in a low voice, his tone unreadable. A declining hollow noble family, a harsh legitimate wife, a pitiful concubine's daughter. Such dramas were common in the back courtyards of the capital. Furthermore, the shadow continued, our people noticed that this morning she inquired of the maid about the nearby hills, and the tenant farmers, especially asking about a farmer named Chan Shi too and his ailing mother. Xiao Heng's branch paused slightly. Having just weathered a power move, unable to even stand firmly, instead of thinking about self-preservation, she began asking about these matters. Was it naive ignorance, or did she have another agenda? Understood, he said flatly. Continue monitoring, but do not interfere. Let's see what she intends to do. Yes. The shadow withdrew as silently as it had come. The cave fell back into silence, only the faint crackling of the fire breaking the stillness. Xiao Heng tossed the branch into the flames, watching it be devoured and reduced to ash. It was not unusual for a piece to move on its own. But a piece that should have resigned itself to fate curling into a corner to await decay not only tried to stand upright, but also began looking around, extending its feelers to touch other points on the board. Now that was intriguing. He recalled the slight self-inflicted sting when the young woman's fingers brushed the arrowhead. That was not fear. It was more like a confirmation of the existence of danger, and also of the taut invisible thread connecting her to that danger. She was testing his limits. And testing too just how sharp this blade of hers could be and in what direction it might be pointed. Xiao Heng leaned back slowly against the cold rock wall, closing his eyes. In the darkness those eyes, brighter than stars, colder than ice, seemed to appear before him again. Not despair, not sorrow. It was a kind of near-arrogant, icy clarity, as if she were saying, since this game is unavoidable, let us see who will be the one holding the pieces in the end. The campfire popped, sending up a larger spark, momentarily illuminating the slight curve of his lips. That curve was barely perceptible, yet it carried the crisp, sharp edge of a mountain mist clearing at dawn. It seemed he had no choice but to continue sitting at this game. And surprisingly, he found himself anticipating where this restless piece would move next. Morning light, sharp as a blade, cut through the night's terror. Shen Qingci pressed her back against the icy door panel. The faint sting at her fingertips, instead of fading, grew more distinct in the silent dawn. That was not fear, it was confirmation. Confirmation that she was already placed on the chessboard, and even more confirmation of the cold, scrutinizing gaze of the chess player. She had not slept all night, yet there was no trace of daze in her eyes. Pushing open the creaking wooden door in the dilapidated courtyard, Zhao Momo stood with her hands on her hips, directing Chun Tao and a coarse servant woman as they unloaded the meager luggage from the carriage. Move faster. Such worthless junk, is it worth dawdling for so long? Zhao Momo's voice was shrill with undisguised contempt. Third miss, as you can see, this place is only this big. Where to put things, this old servant will have to arrange it for you. As for some unused items, this old servant will take the liberty to put them away first so as not to occupy space. Shen Qingci's gaze swept over Zhao Momo's shrewd, gleaming eyes, and landed on a faded bundle that Chun Tao was holding tightly in her arms. Those were a few old clothes and some odds and ends left by her birth mother. All her private property at the moment. You've troubled yourself, stewardess. Shen Qingci spoke. Her voice was hoarse from a night of thirst, yet it was steady without a ripple. But a few old things left by my mother. For me, seeing them reminds me of her, and they are more important than anything. I'd better keep them myself. The fake smile on Zhao Momo's face stiffened. She hadn't expected this docile, seemingly silent concubine-born daughter to speak up. Though her tone was mild, her meaning was clear. Her eyes rolled and she gave a fake smile. Third miss, filial piety is commendable. But this manner is crude. If it gets gnawed by rats or insects, or if some blind-eyed servant steals it, this old servant cannot bear the responsibility. Rather. No need, stewardess. Shen Qingci stepped forward and took the bundle from Chun Tao's hands. Her fingertips touched the coarse cloth and the cold root in her heart drove deeper. Since I am here, I am the master of this place. My things naturally belong in my room. If they really go missing. She lifted her eyes to Zhao Momo. Those pupils that had reflected the cold gleam of the bonfire last night now were clear and bright under the morning light, causing an inexplicable jolt in Zhao Momo's heart. Then it means the people in this manor lack discipline. Those who should be dismissed will be dismissed, and those who should be reported to the Marquis Manor for punishment will not be handled ambiguously. Don't you think so, stewardess? Zhao Momo was choked, a breath stuck in her chest. She had originally thought this concubine-born daughter was timid and cowardly, easy to manipulate, and that pocketing those few things would be as easy as turning her palm. Unexpectedly, she had hit a soft yet tough nail. In her words, she was even using master and rules to pressure her. But just at that moment she couldn't find words to refute. Madame Wang had only told her to take care, but hadn't explicitly said she could swallow up all of the third miss belongings. Third miss is right. Zhao Momo responded dryly, but her face darkened. She turned to the coarse servant woman and said irritably, "What are you still dallying for? Carry the trunks into that west wing room. Really no discernment at all." Shen Qingci no longer looked at her. Holding the bundle, she turned and walked toward the west wing room that had been assigned to her. The room had been uninhabited for a long time. A musty smell mixed with dust. Apart from a hard plank bed, a broken table, and a crooked-legged chair, there was nothing else. The window paper was torn and cold wind whistled in. Chun Tao with red-rimmed eyes began to clean quickly and neatly. Shen Qingci placed the bundle on the bed and walked to the window. Her gaze crossed the dilapidated courtyard wall, looking toward the distant undulating mountains and the faintly visible rooftops of a few farmsteads. Survival was the first priority, but merely existing, rotting silently in this corner like in her previous life, was definitely not the purpose of her rebirth. That warning crossbow dart, the possible gaze in the cave, it was danger but also a signal. A signal that she had already entered someone's line of sight. If a pawn does not want to be casually discarded, it must first prove its value to remain on the chessboard. Chuantao, she suddenly spoke, her voice not loud, but it made Chuantao, who was dusting, immediately stop. On the road yesterday I heard you chatting with the cart driver, Uncle Li. You mentioned that in the mountains near this manor, there seemed to be some medicinal herbs. Chuantao was taken aback and quickly nodded. Yes, miss. Uncle Li is a local. He said on the sunny slopes of the back mountain at this season honeysuckle buplurum, and the like can be found. Villagers sometimes gather some themselves for emergencies when they have a headache or fever. Shen Qingci nodded. In her previous life trapped in the inner quarters, she only had a superficial knowledge of medicine, but she still remembered the properties and general uses of some common herbs. This might be a starting point. Also, she paused as if casually asking, in this manor or among the nearby tenant farmers, is there any family whose life is particularly hard or who has a chronically ill person at home? Chuantao thought for a moment and lowered her voice. When I was helping unload the carriage yesterday, I heard some old women in the manor whispering that the family of Chan Shirtu in the East End is the most pitiful. His father passed away early, there's only his old mother. She injured her leg a few years ago and never fully recovered. This spring she suffered a cough that hasn't gotten better. Chan Shirtu is a filial son. To buy medicine for his mother, he pawned everything he could while still keeping up with the farm work. He has become gaunt and haggard. The manor head Li Dashan is always pressing him for rent. Chan Shirtu. Shen Qingci silently memorized this name. A poor and ailing peasant in desperate need of help. A filial son, which meant he had a weakness and also implied he might be grateful. I see. Her tone remained calm. Later take a small portion of the white rice we brought. Then go ask if there are any coarse steamed buns or flatbreads available in the village and exchange some. Chuantao was puzzled. Miss, our rice is already scarce. Just do as I say. Shen Qingci offered no explanation. Bestowing kindness could not start with the finest, as that would arouse suspicion and easily inflate expectations. A bit of dry rations mixed with coarse grain in the face of hunger and illness was like coal delivered in snow. What she sought was not overwhelming gratitude, but a reason to make contact, an opportunity to observe, and perhaps a seed that could be quietly buried in the soil. She needed to understand this land and these people. She needed to find something truly substantial to stand on beyond the hollow title of a marquis mansion's concubine-born daughter. Whether it was medicinal herbs or something else. The same morning light could not penetrate the dark cave deep in the mountains. The campfire had died, leaving only a wisp of faint smoke curling upward. Xiao Heng sat leaning against the cold rock wall, listening to the low report from the shadow before him. The third concubine-born daughter of Yongchang Hofu Shen Qingci. Her birth mother died early, and she was virtually invisible in the household. This time she was sent here by her legitimate mother Wang Shi under the pretext of convalescence. The accompanying Zhao Mamo is Wang Shi's confidant, skilled at deceiving superiors and subordinates, miserly and corrupt. Xiao Heng toyed with a new dry twig, his expression indistinguishable in the shadows. Yongchang Hofu. He repeated in a low voice, his tone unreadable. A declining noble house hollowed out from within with a harsh legitimate mother and a miserable concubine-born daughter. Such backchamber dramas were hardly novel in the capital. Merely a discarded pawn. Also, the shadow's voice paused, carrying a hint of subtle puzzlement. Our people noticed that this morning she asked her maid about the nearby mountains and villagers, especially inquired about a farmer named Chan Shitu, whose mother was ill. Xiao Heng's hand on the twig halted slightly. Last night's arrow carried a clear warning. An ordinary maiden from a deep boudoir after such a scare would either fall ill or be paralyzed with fear, shrinking inside her room. But she did not. In the morning light, with a calmness bordering on sharpness, she had guarded her pitiful private property. Even before she could even stand firm, she had already cast her gaze beyond the courtyard walls. Inquiring about the mountains, was she seeking a livelihood? Asking about the peasants, especially those impoverished and ill? Was it to bestow favor and win hearts, or did she have other motives? Was she naively ignorant enough to think a few small favors could secure her foothold in the countryside, or did this seemingly pale and fragile pawn harbor a toughness and calculation he had yet to discern? I understand, Xiao Heng said, lightly tossing aside the twig. Keep watching, but do not interfere. Let's see what she intends to do. Yes. The shadow merged back into the light and shadows outside the cave as silently as it had come. The cave fell silent again. Xiao Heng slowly leaned back into the cold rock, closing his eyes. In the darkness, the figure of the young woman last night grew ever clearer. Not her pale face, not her plain dress, but the subtle self-inflicted sting on her fingertip as she wiped the arrowhead. It was not fear but more like confirmation. Confirmation of the existence of danger and confirmation of the taut invisible line between herself and that danger. She was testing his boundaries. More than that, she was gauging just how sharp this blade, forcibly thrown into the game, could be and toward whom it might point. A chess piece moving on its own was nothing extraordinary. But a piece that should have resigned itself to fate, curled in a corner awaiting decay, not only tried to stand upright but also began to look around, even extending feelers to touch other seemingly worthless points on the board. That was intriguing. As if to say, since this game cannot be avoided, let's see who ultimately holds the pieces. The campfire had long died, but Xiao Heng's lips seemed illuminated for an instant by the burst of sparks in his memory. The arc was faint, fleeting, yet carried the sharp edge of a mountain dawn after the mist had cleared. It seemed he had no choice but to continue sitting through this game. And he suddenly looked forward to seeing where this restless piece would move next. Would it be easily broken by harsh reality, or could it indeed carve an unexpected trajectory across this muddy board? He opened his eyes. Outside the cave the daylight was already bright, but it could not reach the deep darkness in his eyes. Then let us wait and see. The faint sting of the fingertip in the morning light seemed to linger beneath Shen Qingci's skin. Leaning against the creaking wooden door, she listened to the footsteps of Mother Zhao's grumbling retreat, and slowly exhaled the foul air that had been pressing on her chest. That declaration, "Since I am here I am the master of this place," had drained every ounce of strength she could muster. It was not a bluff but a boundary, the last line she had to defend at all costs. The old wooden hairpin left by her birth mother was clenched tightly in her hand, the rough grain pressed into her palm, bringing a near painful sense of reality. She looked down at it. The simple plum blossom on the hairpin had been worn almost shapeless. This was proof that her mother had existed, and proof that she, Shen Qingci, was not entirely destitute. She could not afford to fall ill nor to live in constant fear. The cold, scrutinizing eyes from the cave last night hung above her like a sword, reminding her that to cower and resign would only lead to decay. She walked to the window and pushed open the pane patched with torn paper. The cool air rushed in, carrying the scent of soil and vegetation. The courtyard was dilapidated, the walls low, and in the distance lay the undulating outline of mountains. This was her chessboard. Rough, muddy, with edges visible at a glance, yet seemingly holding infinite possibilities. Beyond mere survival, she needed more. "Chunya," she called to the thin little maid who had been timidly following a sign to her casually by Mother Zhao, the lowest maid of the Marquis mansion. Her eyes still held fear, yet also a trace of unsullied simplicity. Miss Chunya's voice was soft. "Are you familiar with the nearby hills? What grows on the mountain?" Chunya was taken aback, as if she hadn't expected the young mistress, who had just endured a scare and appeared pale and fragile, to ask such a question. "Miss, the back mountain connects to a large wild forest. The villagers often go there to cut firewood and also dig for wild vegetables. I've heard there are medicinal herbs deeper in, but there are also many wild beasts, so ordinary people dare not go." Medicinal herbs? Shen Qingci's fingertips twitched slightly. In her past life she had been confined to the inner quarters, but due to prolonged illness she had learned medicine, flipping through many miscellaneous books and recognizing some herbs. Improving crops was a long-term plan. A distant water could not quench immediate thirst. But medicinal herbs, if she could identify and process them, might be a quicker way to exchange for silver. What about the tenant farmers on the estate? Is anyone having an especially hard time, or has a family member sick and in urgent need of help? She asked calmly, but her gaze fixed on Chunya's face, not missing any subtle expression. Chunya grew even more nervous, twisting the hem of her worn clothes. There is Chan Shida's family at the west end of the village. His mother has been ill for some time, and they can never scrape together enough money for medicine. Brother Shi too works day and night, and he's worn to a shadow. Her voice trailed off with simple village sympathy. Chan Shi too. Shen Qingci remembered the name. Poor and sick, a filial son, strong, still not entirely despairing of life. This was an excellent target for extending favor and also for observation. She turned and took out a small cloth bundle from her meager luggage. Inside were a few pieces of dry rations mixed with coarse rice and bean flour, rock hard. They were the food that Mother Zhao had grudgingly left her for the journey, after skimming most of which she had saved. "This," she handed the bundle to Chunya, her voice still flat. "Find a chance to send it secretly to Chan Shi. Don't say I gave it, or just say." A passerby saw the old lattice plight and offered a small token. Chunya's eyes widened looking at the bundle of rations, and then at Shen Qingci's calm, unmoved face. This young lady herself was living in precarious conditions in a shabby house facing a menacing old matron, yet she was giving her only food to those even poorer. Miss this. You yourself? Chunya dared not take it. Do as I say. Shen Qingci's tone was light but brooked no argument. She needed to plant the first seed in this unfamiliar land to have someone remember a kindness of unknown origin. This bit of rations was trivial, but sending charcoal in the snow, however little, could still leave a trace of warmth. More importantly, she wanted the eyes in the shadows to see that Shen Qingci was not a lamb trembling in wait. She was struggling, trying to grasp any possible thread, even if this effort seemed laughably naive in the eyes of the game player. She was gauging her own edge and testing the resilience of that taut line. Almost at the same moment, Chunya slipped out of the back wall of the small courtyard with the rations, restless and uneasy deep within the shadows of a cave in the distant cliff. Xiaoheng, having just received the latest report, paused almost imperceptibly the dry twig he was twirling between his fingers. She gave a bundle of rations to Chan Shida's family. He repeated, his voice devoid of emotion. Yes. Through the new little maid by her side without leaving a name. The shadow reported in a low voice. Previously she also inquired in detail about the hills and medicinal herbs. From my observation, her complexion is still poor, but her eyes are very still. Still. Not lifeless silence, but a nearly sharp calm. Like the water of a deep pool. Smooth on the surface, but beneath it lay a cold, determined resolve. Xiaoheng recalled last night the faint tremor in her fingers when the crossbow bolt grazed them. That wasn't fear. It was more like a confirmation after touching a boundary. Confirmation of danger, confirmation of being in the game, and confirmation of the existence of the... And now this confirmed peace after the warning, instead of retreating into a corner, had begun to look around, even extending feelers to touch those corners of the board that seemed worthless and irrelevant to the main battlefield. Inquiring about mountain herbs was seeking a livelihood. Bestowing favor on a poor sick farming family, was that buying loyalty? Or was she truly naive enough to believe that such small favors could establish a foothold in the complex countryside? Keep watching. Xiaoheng tossed the dry twig aside, or it landed on the dry cave floor with a faint snap. Don't interfere. Let's see what she really intends to do. Yes. The shadow, as silently as it had come, merged into the boundary of light and shadow outside the cave. The cave fell silent again, only the moan of wind through the crevices. Xiaoheng leaned back. The cold rock transmitted its chill through his thin clothes, but he seemed oblivious. A piece moving on its own was nothing strange. Even an abandoned piece had its own way of moving, but a piece that should have resigned itself, curled up in a corner waiting to rot, was not only trying to stand straight but also began to observe the board, measure distances, and even attempt to make its first move. Though this first move was tiny, clumsy, and might even be meaningless. That was very interesting. The campfire had long died out, leaving only cold ashes. But the corner of Xiaoheng's lips seemed illuminated for an instant by the memory of that exploding spark and the pale profile of the girl as she grazed the arrowhead. That arc was extremely faint, fleeting, yet carried the sharp edge of a blade revealed after the morning mist dissipated. She was testing his limits. And more than that, she was measuring how sharp a blade this blade forcibly thrown into the game, could become, and where it could point. Would it be easily broken by this harsh reality, the greed of people and his cold scrutiny, or could it really carve an unexpected trajectory on this muddy chessboard? Originally he only needed a neighbor who would cause no trouble, exist quietly, and if necessary a piece that could be erased at will. But now he had somewhat changed his mind. The game had long been set, the player seemed to sit securely on, yet now in a corner of the board that insignificant little stone seemed to be attempting to roll along a different, even if that trace would eventually be easily erased. But at this moment he felt a flicker of almost cruel anticipation. Well then, let us wait and see. Let's see how far this pitiful struggle of yours can go. Outside the cave the sky had grown bright, dazzlingly illuminating the hills, yet it could not penetrate the deep ink black in his eyes. There still remained a cold scrutiny, but at this moment the center of that scrutiny was firmly fixed on the pale figure in that dilapidated small courtyard below the mountain, using calm to conceal the tempest within. The silent contest had already begun quietly when the first ray of dawn pierced the night.